Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Carrie Linklater. I am your chairperson tonight. I am joined via Zoom by Ms. Diane Knight, Mr. Doug Marks. Our recording secretary is Mr. Jason Robertson, and our city assessor is Mr. Jeremy Powell. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will be then permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. This evening, we will be hearing items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Mr. Robertson, would you please affirm the assessor and our first applicant?
For sure. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jeremy Randall.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Madam applicant, please state your full name.
Diane Schimmelman.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Justin Zarnowski.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Powell. And good evening, Mrs. Shendelman and Mr. Zarnowski. Whenever you are ready, if you would like to start us off on 1200 Portage Avenue.
Sure. File number is 22-12-19. Roll number is 1208071510. Civic address is 1200 Portage. The 2023 assessment is for $4,958,000. Subject property is built in 1972. It is a leasable area of approximately 40,223 square feet. There is no on-site parking. If you look to my page 7, it's located on Portage, close to Aaron. If you look like it's cross street, as you can see, pictures of the following on that. Exterior pictures on the next couple pages. It's a good quality. We have a class as a C building, and I don't believe it's the intention of being a C building. I haven't any interior photos of the property on file and I haven't inspected the property, so. If we get to the comparables, which are on starting on page 13. For the 2020 to 2018 year, we explored 59 comparables. As we can see, the average rate is $12.62. The weighted average is just over 13 with a median of 12. We did the same analysis for 2015 to 2017. So for 6 years leading up to the reference date, but 3 years ago, we have 55 comparables and we show $11.80. And weighted average of $12.59 with a median of $11.50. So we have a slight increase in market over the last 6 years, but pretty stable, which was what you would expect for the citywide marketplace. As you can see, they're all across the levels that we have. So if we go to page 10, starting on the items that were submitted for the 2020 year, we have 4 tenants. They were indicating 19 parking stalls, but I don't know if that's associated with this role or the role that's across the street, a couple blocks down. Anyways, so I'll get to that in a moment. Or I'll let Pellins address that. We can get to that as part of the discovery. We see that the tenants are in place on the next page. We see that one space, unit 5 appears to be vacant, but there is no square foot area. So we look on page 12, we see the income expense that was reported. As you can see, going through here looks pretty typical. I have a few questions to the panel regarding repairs and maintenance, as well as amortization and leasing and marketing. But they report a net earning of approximately $390,700. So what it's looking to me that is a net operating income, that it is not a net income, but I'll get to that in a moment. One question. So when we get back to our work of ourselves, we start on page 1, characteristics of the property. We start on move to page 2. We see a 2012 sale for approximately $3,857,500. I did not put any weight to the sale. I did not investigate the sale, but we know that the commercial marketplace has been a rising commercial marketplace over the last decade, and just under $4 million sale seems reasonable. When we do our analysis for this April 1st, 2021 year for reference date, when we go through the property, speaking to the comparables that we just spoke to, we have an average of $12.23 for 40,223 square feet, which produces a PGI of $492,129, with our standard parameters applied at 12%. For vacancy, expenses at 3% on recoverable, shortfall at 10%, gives a net operating income of $371,814. Cap at 7.5%. Gives us our value at $4,958,000. So it's a pretty straightforward argument today. It seems well vested in the marketplace, middle of the road, for what looks to be a good property. Again, it's not downtown, and it's not so property location. It's not in the downtown center of the business district, and it's not in a real suburban market, but it's still in a good location on Portage. So I think this as value should be maintained, and I'm open to questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Gentleman, questions?
Yes, I have some questions. Regarding the comparables on page 12, is it? No, 13.
All right, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry, regarding the comparables on page 12,
Yep.
13, sorry, page 13. Would you say that your comparables start from a small size of as low as 195 square feet? Would you say that any of those spaces that are well below the actual spaces of the property would be comparable?
No, what I'm saying is this is a citywide look at the marketplace. So you have it for the 3 years leading up to the reference date and 3 years separated from that as well. And if you look overall, you look at the total amount, it's 335,000 some odd square feet. The average CRU size is 5,900 with a median of 4,100 or almost 4,200. So when we're saying the average weighted and the average and the median are applied, you can see where it's coming from. If you want to isolate into an individual comparable on Portage, you can do that if you want. But realistically, this is the marketplace, and we're just showing it in its totality. So I don't feel that a $12 rent or $13 rent in that range is out of line for the subject property, and that's what I would reflect.
But in order to arrive at those medians and minimum and averages and weighted averages, you've used small spaces like 195 square feet and 500 square feet. So those numbers have been used to calculate those medians and those averages.
Yeah, no, I've used smaller spaces as well, but I mean, there's not too many at that range. But what I'm saying is there's 24,000 square foot, there's 39,000 square foot, there's 12,000, there's 31. There's a number of ones in between the 3,000 and the 10,000 mark. We're looking at the overall picture, and then we're trying to reconcile what the value should be from that point on. So again, I think it's a pretty good analysis on market value. We're not isolating to one or two particular comparables. We're cherry picking any one or two comparables. We bring it in the full marketplace.
So you don't think that picking comparables that are more similar in size would make more sense? And then making those, and then
Well, you have a CRU
an average or a mean of those.
right, but you have a CRU between 4,700 and about 15,650. So if you go through the comparables, there are lots those size. You can individually look at the rents. So even
Yes,
on Portage.
I realize that, but you've also used many small, much smaller ones to come up with your number, correct?
Yeah, there is their list.
Right, and are you aware of the economies of scale in real estate and that larger spaces typically lease for lower rents and smaller spaces typically lease for higher rents?
If you're looking at extreme ends, yes, I'm more than aware of that, but also you have to look at the utility that the space provides. If you are you're more of a headquarter type location, you need a larger size space, and the market is less than for your CRU renters, but you typically command a higher rate given the utility that the property would provide to that renter. It all depends on what the marketplace is. Here, we're not hiding anything, so you can go through and the panel themselves can go through any individual variable, and if they think, for 4,600 square feet, they can look through, or to 6,000 square feet, they can look through, and they can look at any rent that they want. So I'm providing the factual market at the reference date to the agent as well as the panel to make their own decision if they determine that the rent we put in place isn't what their opinion of the market is. So.
Okay, I guess we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that one.
I think she said, sorry,
You'll have to
Mrs.
disagree on
Schendelman.
that one.
Yeah.
I said we'll have to agree
Okay.
to disagree on that one.
Okay.
Also regarding the comparable, would you agree that your comparables are mostly in the central business district downtown, close to Portage and Main, or on Broadway, where there's a high density of office space and office use?
There's more Class C buildings, obviously, in the central business district, so that's where you would demographically, that's where they're situated, right? So I didn't feel that bringing in, what we could also look at this as on what we class in OFS, a suburban office. I didn't feel that those rates were more appropriate to the subject property, because typically you derive a higher square foot average for a suburban office in a true suburban setting. So that's the reason why I didn't bring that marketplace in. I thought it would be a little too high for this particular subject. With the Class C marketplace, I didn't think was out of line. And considering you have market in at $12, it seems to be in line with what the market's indicating. So there is a $10 comparable in use, but the property as well. Again, I'll let you present your information as you see fit.
But it's fair to say you don't think that this is really a suburban office, right? Like, just to paraphrase what you just said.
No, what I'm saying is if I would bring in a suburban OFS marketplace, it would be more outside. And again, this is and on the verge of Pole Park area, you know, Erin and Portage kind of thing, you're venturing into that. But typically where if I'm bringing in a citywide marketplace for an OFS, it would be pushing a $15 rate. And I think that's a little too high for the overall. So that's a little bit higher generating in most circumstances for those comparables. So I'm taking it to the lower end, which would be a Class C, and I believe this is a Class C building. And that's the market we're looking for. So that's what I'm bringing in.
But I think it's also fair to say, though, acknowledge this isn't in the central business district, right? It's not downtown.
I never said it was.
No, I'm asking you, do you think this building is downtown?
I just said it was. The center business district limits are, and it's well outside of it. So,
But nonetheless, I think you could say the majority or even vast majority of your comparables are in the downtown.
that's where the Class C buildings are. That just because a Class C building is outside of downtown doesn't mean it's going to be outside of the relationship with marketplace. If you can show me a study that would prove that, I would care to look at it.
Well, would it be fair to say there's likely not a lot of these buildings in this location because there isn't any demand for it?
No,
Ultimately
they're just
drives-
situated where they were built. Like I said, there's more of an OFS market, suburban market. But that's outside of this particular type of property. It's a Class C building. I don't believe there's any proof that it's not. And just because happens to be some Class C buildings that are less populous outside the center business doesn't mean that the marketplace for it would detract from it. I mean, after all, you have a near $4 million sale, 10 years removed in an escalating marketplace. Seems quite low. By that definition, you would see that market value would be there even then. So when the market's stabilizing and increasing, you would see that, as you can see in the last 6 years, that C class is increasing in rent, that this should be a well-primed property for commercial interest. So I don't see this as anything that I wouldn't turn my eye away from Class C buildings. So hopefully I answered the questions.
What I guess, didn't you earlier say you weren't putting any weight on that sale, and now you're saying the sale does matter?
I was very clear. I can repeat it if you like. In a rising escalating marketplace, there was a near $4 million sale. I'm not putting any weight on it for this particular valuation. But when we look at the valuation as far as what our independent marketplace is at the reference date, we can see that what it is at 4.9 million approximately. You can see what it was then. An escalation of maybe 20% over the decade is not out of line. It seems to be right where the market we would expect. So again, we're putting our full weight on the comparables that we're bringing in with the parameters at the reference date. We're not looking back to see what was in place for us then and extracting anything out from that. We're just looking at what the market sale was, and it was foreign value to be it as such. So. Any other questions?
On your page 4 of your brief, there's an asterisk and it refers to potential rent as net of all expenses to the owner. Are you aware of the cap on operating costs, additional rent on tenants?
I know.
Sorry, we're having a lot of trouble hearing you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is there a
On
chance, excuse me, is there a chance you could turn your microphone up on your laptop?
I can try to do that. Are
Thank
you
you.
aware, on page 4 of your brief, you refer to the rent is net of all expenses to the owner. Are you aware of a cap on operating costs of one of the tenants in the building?
No, we're not doing this on a lease full contract. We're doing this on a marketplace approach. So we're taking marketplace parameters and marketplace rents, marketplace expenses. If there's any individual contractual leasehold issues, we're not dealing with it from a contract perspective. So
I understand that the general reassessment is done by the model and a general reassessment, but when you come to hearing, do you not look at the specifics of a property?
yes, I do. I look at the leasehold and I also look at the market, and I don't see any rationale to lower from the marketplace assessment that we derived. I think the subject property is performing close enough to market that it should be considered at market. And I have some questions regarding your information, but I'll wait until I get a chance to cross-examine.
I don't have anything further.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
Is there any pictures of the interior?
I don't have any on file.
Okay.
I don't know.
Have you visited?
I didn't inspect the property.
Have you visited the building?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Marks?
No questions for me, thank you.
Just have a couple here. Sorry, you had mentioned parking when you were giving your presentation.
Yeah, there's offsite parking. I didn't know that at the time. There was 19 sites, 19 stalls reported. And when I looked at the subject property, I don't really see where you could get 19 cars. Like you have at the back on my page 7. Hypothetically, you might be able to get 19 in, but I didn't put any value to any parking on-site parking. So if there is generated on-site parking, that's part of the cross-exam I'll have. But from a perspective of how it sell, is there really parking there? I went the other way, but then I didn't put anything for any consumer parking, but it does show on that.
Because I'm sorry, I'm assuming there's a back lane, correct?
Yep. Yep, it shows it. Yeah.
Okay. So it's odd to me that there would be no parking.
There may not also be income generated from those stalls. So,
Right.
I mean, again, I have some questions across examinations.
Okay. So do you have any idea when this building was last inspected?
I don't know. I don't have any file photos. Usually we have some, but I don't know, honestly.
Okay.
So
Just because it has a B&E of 1972, so
yes, I do.
that's
Yeah.
a little curious.
Yeah, but
One question, if I
Yes,
could.
go ahead.
Have there been any building permits taken out on this building since 72?
I would assume so for Jim, but not every building permit would attribute to value to general maintenance. But as far as if there's any tenant fits, anything that would require greater revenue, I didn't get a chance to query with property planning and development. I did look through what we had on file and I didn't see anything. But I think best to ask the ownership group.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, and I have no further questions. Mrs. Shendelman, if you'd like to proceed with your brief.
Thank you. I'll just go through the information on page 1. The property is a 3-story office building at 1200 Portage Avenue. It is not located in the downtown area or in the suburban office area. Marketing is difficult for this reason because we can't profess benefits that go with those 2 categories. The immediate vicinity provides higher crime and security issues than a suburban property. Access is difficult to westbound traffic coming from downtown, and it's difficult to leave the building and travel westbound on Portage Avenue. The building is a Class C office space with a 10-year history of being more than 1/3 vacant. The main floor leased for the first time in 10 years, a few years before the reference date. And although at that time the lease was only a 2-year lease, so it's been leasing this building has been very difficult. And to address the sale price reference that was made earlier, the reason this building has not appreciated in value is because for 10 years it was 1/3 vacant for the since the landlord purchased this building. There is some on-site parking. There is 19 stalls on site at the back. And because the zoning for this office building is 1 stall per 750 square feet, the owner had to purchase a property at 584 Wall Street to provide parking and to be in line with the zoning. So tenants at this building actually have to cross Portage Avenue and go down to 584 Wall Street to get their car, other than the 19 stalls that are behind. The floor plate of this building is over 13,000 square feet, and it makes it difficult to demise. There's one central entrance. The building is dated in appearance. There hasn't been a lot of renovations to this building. Windows are small and narrow. Are you hearing me, everybody? Yes? Page 2 is the income workup. We've used the leases in place as market rent because the majority of these leases were negotiated in and around the reference date. We've used the same 12% vacancy as the assessment department and the $10 shortfall. We've used the non-recoverable of 5%, which was the to cover off the non-recoverable expenses. For certain, we have from one tenant as well as any other non-recoverable work that's done at the building, and 2% other in accordance with the assessment department. And we've also capped the net operating income at 7.5%. We've arrived at a value of $4,044,000. Comparables, direct comparables to this property were difficult to find. We've used 547 Notre Dame and 1745 Ellis because they're in the general vicinity of this property, and they're similar to the two smaller units, 6,000 square feet and 4,000 square feet. 1745 Ellis is actually a bit more of a retail location, although it is all office. So it attracts a higher rent. The subject leases we've used as comparables because they were negotiated in and around the reference date, and they range, 3 of the leases are at $10 per square foot and 1 is at $12. As noted before, the property was 1/3 vacant for over 10 years. We've used the same 12% vacancy rate as the assessment department, so there's no issues there. Shortfall, $10, the same as the assessment department, although we have to keep in mind that, forget that. Non-recoverable and other, again, that was the 5% that was taken away and covered off with 3%. And again, this property has much more non-recoverable than the 3% would take care of. So we've used the 5% and 2% structural other. Capitalization rate we agreed with. We respectfully submit that the current assessment does not represent the market value at April 1, 2021 and require adjustment to $4,044,000. On page 5, we have the 2019 income statement, and I understand that amortization is not an amount that is used in assessment, but we have to keep in mind that this statement does not allow for any vacancy allowance. And so in fact, if we were to take off the vacancy allowance and shortfall, we would still be well below the net operating income that the assessment department is using. Similarly, for 2020, the same situation. The actual rent that the landlord is getting is $430,000, which is well below what the assessment department is using. And similarly, if we were to apply or include an allowance for vacancy and shortfall, we would still be in around the $300,000 range for net income, which is well below what the assessor is using. I have nothing further. Justin, anything further?
Yeah, I think the main thing to keep in mind here, and the reason why our comparables are reasonably limited, and why the appraisers' comparables are all downtown or elsewhere, is because this building really kind of falls in between both the downtown in the sense that it doesn't have the parking that you would expect for suburban office, and so it doesn't have the advantages, but it also isn't in the downtown. And so when we're looking at it, our view is that there are very few buildings that exist like this, kind of in between in a neighborhood you wouldn't really call a suburb and want to work in, but also not in the downtown with the amenities. And so that's why, ultimately we really relied on the market rent that we could get when we took the spaces to market, and people were willing to pay $10 for the majority of them. Our view is that there is no better market than when you take it to the actual market and people say, I'm not paying more than $10 a foot. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't. Just to confirm, there is 19 stalls on site. I wasn't sure if they were referring to your other lot, cross portage. Do you collect rent on the 19 stalls?
Nothing over and above what's in their lease rent.
Okay.
There's rent at the other property at 584 Wall Street.
Yeah, yes, and just so we're clear, you're charging at Wall Street for tenants, correct?
Charging for parking, yes.
But
some leases include it. So there might be, there's a number of I think the two bigger leases include the parking overall. I think some of the smaller leases, they pay the rent. But it's a different property.
Okay, so I'm just trying to tie this down. From a market perspective, with those rent, there's value to those 19 stalls. And
there's no rent on those 19 stalls.
From a leasehold contract, you're telling me it's included in the leases.
If we charge for the rent, we get less per square foot. If we charge for the parking, ultimately tenants, when they think about rent, they think about it on a gross basis. So they're saying, I'm going to pay 10 grand a month, whether that's 9 grand for the rent and $1,000 for the parking, or 10 grand for the rent. It's the same to them, right? So we're not collecting revenue from the parking because it's factored into that $10 a foot they're paying.
Can I finish with my questions? Who is the tenant who pays the rents? You said it was one of the tenants, or is it vetted in a lease in which tenant?
There's no parking revenue for this property.
Who is having access to these sites? Which tenants?
What
do you mean?
You just said that 19 stalls were to one of the tenants embedded in the lease, and they're not collecting rents embedded in the lease. Who has access to these stalls? Which tenant?
I don't have that right here.
Great. I'll move on from that point. As far as your comparables on page 3, you have 4 for the subject, which are leasehold contract, and you only have 2 that are up to the marketplace, which is at 457 Notre Dame and 1745 Ellis, both of which are higher at $12 and $13. You've addressed that there's a Class C building. It was difficult to bring in rents. You see my comparables. I brought in every rent that I could find that is appropriate in Class C building. Did you not have access to the whole marketplace? Or are these the only 2 rents that you're aware of?
Downtown isn't comparable, right? Downtown and airport office aren't comparable. So if you're asking, did we have access to comparables that aren't comparable? Sure, but what we took the word comparable to mean they had to be comparable, and so we included those.
Did you have any access to comparables on Portage Avenue itself, outside of the center business district?
No.
Okay. For office space, not that I'm aware of.
Did you look at my brief to see the Portage ones that are outside of the center business district?
You have very few that are not.
960 Portage. 960 Portage is outside, is it not?
It's a little bit outside, but it's not as far as the.
Your 1200 is much closer to you than the business district. So.
Okay, so now you're cherry picking.
No, I'm showing a relationship between all of them. It's not cherry picking. Moving on.
Wait, 960 Portage is 765 square feet.
Yes, I know, and it's dollars in relation.
So okay, well, I mean, you're asking why we didn't put like a single cubicle in there.
Again,
It's because they're not comparable. When you say comparable, it's supposed to be similar to the premises. So why didn't we pick off a 700 square foot space that's on the second floor to a different building? It's because it's not comparable.
that would be your opinion, but there is a marketplace that you should be reflecting. It's a higher rent, yes, but we're putting in a model rate nearly $4.
Yeah, there's a marketplace that we went to, and like we keep saying, these are leasehold rents. We went to the market. That means you go to people and you say, hey, what's the highest rent you'll pay? And these people, like, it's not like we oh no, we want a lower tax bill. We're going to take $10 instead of 12 or 20. Nobody was willing to pay 12, right? That's the fundamentally the marketplace is when you go to the public and you say who's willing to pay for these spaces. That's the market. It's not what somebody's paying for 700 feet, in 960 Portage.
On page 4, second paragraph, and I quote, the assessors instead estimating market value as there is no recoverable expenses. You are aware that we have a 3% allowance for non-recoverable expenses.
Yes, I referred to the 3%. I said it's not enough.
Okay, but the difference here, you're using 7 and we're using 3. So right now there's a difference between rent and there's a difference between non-recoverables, 3 or 7%, 4% difference. Those are the only two differences between the analyses.
Correct.
Okay. Moving on to your page 5 and your page 6. We don't use amortization, so we would be backing that out as far as what the operating is. As far as your leasing and marketing, can you explain what what this cost is? Is this lease commissions?
Yes, it is.
And you're aware that we don't include these commissions as part of a reduction for
Yeah,
marketing
I said that.
or assessment.
I said that when I presented.
And that is a summation of nearly roughly 80,000-ish, give or take.
Correct.
Um,
But this is for 100% lease building. This income statement is the actual income statement. There was no vacancy at this point.
so
There's no allowance for vacancy. The workup, the income approach requires an allowance for vacancy.
I'm aware of that. So getting back to the leasing and marketing commissions that you paid, you have 2 tenancies that leased up approaching the reference date, correct?
Pardon me?
You have 2 tenancies that were approaching the reference date, correct?
Yes?
As part of the leasing, did you lease it yourself?
No.
So what was the asking rates that were put out there? Where was the advertising?
We are not the leasing agents for this property, so I do not know.
What was the asking rates to get into the building?
I don't know. We aren't the leasing agents for this property. We property manage this only.
Okay.
You have to ask Colliers.
That's the only questions I have. Thank you.
Ms. May, did you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Mr. Marks?
I do not either. Thank you.
I have one question. Could you, can either of you speak to the condition of this property?
Yeah, it's not good. It's dated office. It's all built out and it's all been used as office at certain points, but it's, if you went into the DMV and you see the dusty cubicles and the old carpet and worn down like that, it's a bottom end Class C building that hasn't had a ton of upkeep. And a big part of that is because we can't charge the tenants for it, right? As much as the assessor cannot factor in what the actual leases are, these tenants expect to have a reasonably low operating cost, and because they're nonprofits and that type of business, and they're leasing space that's cheaper, and that's what they're getting. So yeah, it's not great condition. It's functional as a Class C office.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I ask a further question?
Yes, I'm just going to ask one more question. So you didn't think it would be prudent to include interior photos?
That's my question.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I didn't do it. I didn't think of it.
Okay, thank you.
I'll follow up.
All right. Ms. Knight, did you want to ask another question?
You just asked it, Carrie. Thank you.
All right.
I just have a couple other follow-up questions. Mediation services, is this not province Manitoba?
Uh, I'd have to look it up. It could be.
Okay, because typically provincial government tenancies require a certain quality of building. And there are occupying nearly 9,000 square feet of this building, so you're unaware of whether it's provincial. It sounds like provincial services, which again would indicate it wouldn't be a below average building that they'd be occupying. Next question would be: any of these tenancies, the new ones, is there any tenant inducements in the first year's tenant fit ups, reduction in rent to accommodate anything that the tenant would put in a reduction from rent for the first year or two?
Unless your previous question was a statement, do you want an answer to it? Because it's not the province. It's mediation services, a community resource for conflict resolution, Inc. So it's I don't know if it's nonprofit, but it's not, the province.
Is it funded by the province?
But that doesn't impact the quality of the space. A lot of people get funding. That's all that entire nonprofit industry. You're not getting the same quality of space as you would with the provincial specs that go on.
As far as leases, is there any tenant inducements at all? Free rent or in any way, shape, or form? Is the tenant pay for any of the typical tenant fit-ups for even changes?
No.
There's only questions.
Thank you. Does either party have a wish for a summation?
We had a rebuttal as well.
Folders, able to vote.
Yeah.
That's it.
And just before we get, I don't object to the 2 pictures of the comparables, and technically on page 3, 4 will be new information, but I'm had a chance to review it, and I think you should put as much weight as you feel necessary to it. It's just the least that's in place. So we don't need some evidence.
If you would like to proceed with your rebuttal.
Okay, the page 1 and 2 is a map of the assessors comparables. And just to be clear, the dots represent more than one of his comparables. But if we look at how many dots are in the Portage and Main sort of downtown area and the Broadway area, you'll see that the comps were mostly in the downtown central business district. And there's one, the 970 Portage Avenue, which was down on Portage Avenue, a little bit closer to the subject. And there was a couple in the Polo Park area. But you can see from the dots that the majority of the comparables were in the downtown business district. The second, the lease we included was just to show that in the reference year, February 1st, 2021, the mediation services did a new lease at $11 per square foot. We felt that was important to include because it was basically right at the reference date. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cole, questions? Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
No questions.
I also have no questions. So do either of you have a wish for a summation?
No, I think we covered everything as well. I'm good.
All right.
And just briefly for us, I mean, there's no better market rent than when you take it to the market. And so all we're asking is for you guys to look at it, say, we did the best we could in leasing this, and really that's what the actual market is for the space is what we got.
All right, thank you both. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Very much.
Mr. Gupta now. Mr. Gupta, can you turn on your camera, please?
If you'd like to confirm, Mr. Gupta.
Mr. Gupta, please state your full name.
Rajiv Gupta.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I confirm that.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Gupta.
Good evening.
Mr. Cole, whenever you are ready.
Okay, file number 22-300. Roll number is 12-093123,000. Civic address is 250 Portage. 2023 assessment is for $2,572,000. The building was built in 1965. We have an effective meter built out of 1965. We have a leasable area of 16,273 square feet. We have no other one. If we go to page 7 is the location of the property. It's on the corner of Gary and Portage. You look on page 8. There's advertising for the property owner on the side. But aside from that, it's vacant. So we have a listing, a sale listing in 2018, page 10, listing the Colliers. And they're listing at what we would typically see. It is a updated space. It is what you would receive with a new tenant coming in, and the tenant fit-ups that would be reflected of that. So, and again, that'll speak to the condition of the property as in a moment. Just so we point out, it looks like they put a mezzanine up on the one side. That would be a little bit more than a tenant fit-up, but when Colliers is marketing this, they're marketing it to the downtown clientele as a OFS, what we consider a one to three story or a tenant that would typically go in Class B building. So if you look on page 11, they're asking for $3.5 million, highlighted in blue on the bottom, excluding the lower level space. I was unsure what that particularly meant in the listing, other than maybe there's a tenant of the property owner that wishes to remain on, but typically when you buy the whole building, there's nothing cut out of it. So it seems like a bit of an odd thing. So I'll get to that in a moment. With the ownership group under appeal today. So typically what you'd see here, and it's a really good rendering. That's what they envision office. That would you put the money in, you invest your capital to update the space for a new tenant. And then again, that gets into your tenant inducements, tenant pays for some, ownership pays for some, whatever the contract works out to be. But that's what they're looking at. So typically, if this space was brought back to a more marketable state, they're asking about $3.5 million for the property. The next page over gives the square foot areas. As you can see, the lower level spaces, the main level spaces, upper level. I believe that is the mezzanine that they would look to put in. But again, you'll see nothing. So on the next page over on page 13 is a listing for the same property again in 2020. They're asking $3.48 million in the condition added. So again, you see the condition added. It's in page 15. I haven't inspected the property, but I have walked by it. So you can see right into it. I don't believe the condition that's shown in the sale listing here is any different from what you would find it as January 1st, 2020. So obviously it needs to be updated as such. So As we move along, you can see that the photos on page 16, 17, 18. And then it gets to your leasing. We see on page 19, they're asking $19.90. So, as you can see, a little bit further detail as we go along back to page 20, a bit of a blown up look as far as they're using the same, it looks like they're using the same information that colleagues was same pictures. Obviously, it's more than one brokerage advertising this. And you get a good example of it's your typical tenant fit up everywhere. You paint new carpet, new flooring, updated ceiling, but along the left hand or right hand side of the picture, there's the potential to put a mezzanine space to increase your area. And it's done along the back wall as well, as you can see on page 20. So that would be more than tenant and that would be more than a tenant and fit up. But if I'm marketing the space and I'm looking for long term to bring it back to the location that is, and that's something I'd highly be looking at. So that increases your area, it gets a nice good feel. It's relatively cheap as far as structural work would go. You would have to put a small mezzanine. That would be the case. So, and then of course, page 22 is then look downwards kind of thing. So on page 23 is the 2017 listing of the property. We see that is again listed. Main floor rent is at $24. Obviously, that's gross. And as you can see, the condition of the building is as such. On page 26 is the 2020 income expense questionnaire. We see a rent income of approximately $18,000. But pretty much it's 100% vacant. They report 95. Realistically, it's vacant. I look back to the last year where I could find the data on it. You can see on page 20, it's a 2010 just to get a feel for what the market was in it prior to the vacancy which occurred. We see that we have a commercial rent on page 29, $25.14. Then we see on the next page, or sorry, the second as well is at $10.71. So we have reported at $12.43 for that overall. So right in line with market, given about an 11-year gap back then. Then we see the next year, we also see a reflection of what was in place, and they're reporting another rent in place for taking charge at $70.82. So overall, they're reporting the net rent commercial at $50.11. Same idea. The number of years after that. Getting to the comparables. Current market. Let's skip ahead to page 39. I looked at it two ways. There's a large space that could be leased out to retail. It would be more, maybe more higher in downtown retail rent or suburban markets. So we brought that in. As you can see from the comparisons of 89 comparables, we have an average weighted rent of about $16. And again, we can see what the rents were being asked for and achieved prior to the vacancy which occurred. So at $16 with an updated space, that seems more reasonable. And then the other way you go with it is if you go to more of an office build for that kind of fit up, and you put it on like you see in the pictures there, which is right in line with what I'm looking at. What I'm thinking in my mind is how you'd be looking at taking a competitive tenant out of a OFB type property. If you're going to rent an OFB property, this is a tenanted series space that would be competing with it. And the OFB study is as such. I'm not going to get into great detail as the chair has already heard this, and I believe it's already been heard by one of the other panel members. So the stabilized overall for the 3 years is $14.39 for the vacancy of about 12% stabilized. Shortfall at $13.88 and a non-recoverable expense weighted average at 3%. So the study is there for your leisure. You can look through the rest if you want. So if we look back to page 30, where we get to the current analysis of the property, assessment of the property, we see overall with the basement area put in, we have $11.72 in the condition that it's in. quite low. And when we remove the basement area, we still have $13.56, which again is about $3.50 less than on a retail environment or fest environment. And it's about $1 less than the comparables as far as the OFB comparables. So I feel that's reasonable where it is. And just so we're clear, in the 2020 year, the weighted average is $14.84. I'm taking, but I'm taking the stabilized average of 3 years. So I'm giving it a reasonable look because I think that's how any investment downtown would we looked at it and so it comes to a little less than that. But given the overall $11.72, I think it's reasonable for vacancy. I do think it's warranted to an adjustment in vacancy, but I believe it should be about a 15% vacancy, given the rents that are associated with it. Because if you're going to be going with a larger vacancy, then you should be putting more of a marketed rent at around the $15, $16 ranges, where the two comparison rental series types were coming from. So with the reduction rate that we have today, I think about 15% vacancy is an appropriate. You can make the reduction from that point, and the rest of it I think should be left as such. Given that we have two sales, asking sales of north of $3 million, I think that's a fair compensation for additional things. With that, I'm open to questions.
Mr. Gupta, did you have any questions of the assessor?
Yes. First of all, I would like to state that the building has been vacant for a number of years, and there has been, as pointed out by Mr. Jeremy, only a meager rent of about approximately $8,000 from a small area in the basement. And the building has been having continuous operating losses all along, and all the income statements submitted confirm that for the year in question, there has been negative return on investment at $90,000. The property has been 100% vacant since 2020. There is no tenant in the building. Coming back to the market income or income stream calculated by the assessor, he has taken the leasable area at 16,273 square feet. But whereas the total submission in all the income and expense statements all along the years, right from the purchase of the property in 2008, has been 11,716 square feet. So the discrepancy which I have noticed is in the calculation of the basement area. So the assessor has taken a total area, basement area as 7,237 square feet, whereas only an area of 2,680 square feet is a leasable or a usable area basement. So that removes a major chunk of approximately $30,000 in the potential rent calculated on the statement there. So that will bring down.
Mr. Gupta, excuse me, can you just be asking questions of what the assessor has presented? Because you're giving evidence for your brief.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I just.
Okay.
So
if you have questions to the assessor of what he presented directly.
No.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
I do have a question in regards to the I&E showing the 11,716 square feet, and the assessor's using the 16,273. So is that difference the basement then?
Just so we're clear, when we have on the I&E, we have 13,000, because I brought in more than just one I&E. We have 13,149 square feet area leased. So, and then we have what was reported on the current one, which is 11,716 square feet. But we also have, again, we seem to have
then 9,800 square feet or something.
Yeah, and then
they're all different.
Yeah, I know, and it gets even more when we go to the listings, which are current for 17, 20. We have estimated areas of 21,711 square feet with lower 2 series at 1,382 square feet, another one at 1,555 square feet.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
73. And as I pointed out, the upper, which doesn't, I believe, exist, that's a projected if you put a mezzanine at about another 7. So I'm not sure where that comes from. Other than these are current marketable areas. And it's the same one on, like, if I can give the page numbers. It's on page 12, it's on page 13. It's on page 19. So again, I'm trying to be reflective of what we have on file. I haven't been in the property. I don't think there's a mess there from the pictures. It doesn't look like there is, but it looks like there's potential to put one in, and they're reflecting of that in the average.
Okay. So have you been in the building?
No,
And it's been empty for how long?
the owner indicated since 2020 fully vacant, but I brought in INEs for what I was looking for was what the rents actually were in place. So
Correct, yeah.
starting from page 26, moving backwards in time, we see it's 95% vacant.
Mhm.
And then we go to 2010, we see it's 0% vacant.
Correct, yeah.
In between there, they lost their tenancies, but what I'm showing a reflection of is what's there.
Right.
So,
So do you have any idea why it's not being rented?
it seems to be advertised and for lease and for sale and for redevelopment. So
Mhm.
it looks like this property is you need to invest money in your property. This is why we have allowances. This is why you see tenant fit ups. And this is nothing more than a tenant fit up that would be required for this space.
Right.
Exception of the mezz, which would be greater than, but has potentiality of being much more marketable if you put the investment in there. And that wouldn't be
If you put some money into it, it would be
It
a
wouldn't be a-
wonderful place.
like that.
Okay.
that
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Marks.
No questions for me, thank you.
So I just want to be clear, this has been listed since 2018.
I believe so, yes. At least the advertising icon, I didn't find anything before that.
Thank you. Mr. Gupta, if you would like to give us your presentation, please.
Yes. So shall I start all over again or continue from till the point I was there?
I would suggest starting over.
Okay. Adding on to the vacancy of the building, it has been vacant 100%, 95% vacant since 2014. There has been no tenants in the building since then. Just as I mentioned, just a 5% or only a 1,300 square feet area occupancy in the basement. And that has been giving a meager revenue of about $8,000. Coming to the calculation of the area back, the leasable area as we have been submitting has been 11,716 square feet. And that leaves a discrepancy in the basement calculation by the assessor. The actual area is about 2,680 square feet that is leasable, whereas in the calculation on page 3, it has been used as 7,237 square feet. Now, the assessor has pointed out the building has been listed at 21,700 some odd square feet, but it is all the brokers who have presented it in various ways and means, because one of the brokers, which is, I believe, Shindico, they have only mentioned the building area as 10,000 square feet. So to be honest, I don't have any clarity on how much the area of the building is. They have been using these areas to market and say that it can be sold at an X dollar value, at a $3.5 million value or something. Reality is that there has been no customer writing an offer at any price on that. The building does need a lot of upgrades. I don't have numbers. We have never had a chance to have those numbers worked up, but apparently the people visiting the property, they said it needs a lot of work. And that has been probably setback that it has been not been leased or sold. Another big setback is there is no parking around the building. Even the street parking, which was earlier there, has been, has gone because of the bike path. It's a real challenge for people to visit the building. Even the tenant in the basement had a huge challenge. That was a retail store, and they always face problems, people visiting the business. I'm not going into an argument about the rate, which has been on the page 3 as calculated by assessor. Even if we take the same rate without any difference of opinion on that. I would say the calculation of the net income will be much lesser because it will take a big chunk from the basement of about $30,000. And my approximate calculation would bring it down the net income on this property, according to the calculation made by assessor on page 3, to about 120 or $123,000. And with the same capitalization rate, the property value doesn't go more than $2 million. So without going into an explanation of what is there in the building, the assessor would know the condition of the building better, or the city would have the means to have a look at the building to see what it requires. Accepting whatever he has calculated, even the value of the building doesn't go beyond $2 million, even in that state. Though for comparables, only one building in downtown, 5 Donald Street, has been utilized. And this is a Class C building. And all other buildings are in the suburbs. They are not in downtown for comparable purposes. But again, as I mentioned earlier, even if everything is taken in letter and spirit of the comparisons, what the assessor has made, with the basic difference in the area calculation, it leaves the value of the building at the same, at even less than $2.1 million. So that's all I can submit.
I thank you.
All right.
Questions?
Yes, I do. Just before we get going, is there a second floor, a full second floor?
Yes, there is a second floor.
But that was my main thing, because I didn't really see it in any of my pictures. What I saw was potentiality. So what we're looking here for the rendering, we're looking at the main floor with the potential of the mezz, and then above that, there is a second floor.
Yes, there is a second floor, but a major chunk of the second floor goes up in the public area because there is a large stairwell. So when you've used the area in your calculation at 3,900 square feet, I would say that is the area of square footage for the second floor.
Yes, and I see on page 17, my brief, you see stairs going up. So,
yes.
So when your entrance comes in, you have a bit of a open space.
Yes.
And then back, you have the remainder of actual floor space.
Yes.
Okay. So when we look through the reporting of the areas, your marketing on page 13, when we see an upper level floor of 7,237 square feet, you're saying it should be roughly maybe 1,000 less than that.
On second floor, it will be. It is not more than 39 or 4,000 square feet at all.
9 or 4,000 square feet. 40. Sorry, I can't hear.
So you're
1,000 square feet.
Could you repeat that?
The second floor is not more than 4,000 square feet.
So it's 3,200 square feet removed. That would be a substantial amount. Okay. All right, but overall, we don't have 21,711 square feet, which is what's being advertised at.
It's not there because I do not know how brokers have calculated that area to be marketed. And as you can see, another broker has only mentioned 10,000 square feet. So I have no correlation to say how they are marketing at what square footages. And there has been no customer walking into actually measure and say that we'll sign up a lease for this X area or X square footage to confirm how much is the square foot area there. So
just from the assessor stamp, this is about we're a leasable area of 16,700. 16,273 square feet. So it's about 5,500 off the gross. That would encompass at least you're saying about a 4,000 square foot area. So roughly we're about what you're reporting, what you're indicating. Yes, what we have been reporting at 11,700 odd square feet. No, at 16,273 square feet, because if you take about 5,500 square feet off the gross, which you're indicating is that when you walk in and it's exposed and your remainder of the course about what you say. So that would be. No, I'm pointing out on the basement. You have taken a basement at 7,237 square feet, and that is a total area, which is you're probably picking up from the floor plate as marketed by the brokers. But the basement has a big chunk of crawl space as well.
And it has a lot of.
We have a leasable area. We have a leasable area of 1,370 square feet for one. We have a leasable area of 2,430 square feet. But we also have a substandard basement, which we have a $3.87 rent on it, or approximately half. So we're saying about half of it's leasable. The other half is substandard basement finished storage. Is that not accurate?
That's not even leasable because it has service areas, it has electrical room, it has utility room, it has a crawl space, it has large bathrooms in the basement. So the actual leasable space in the basement doesn't cross 2,680 square feet at all. Even that is a challenge. Even to get that space out to lease is a challenge, compromising or making a small subdivision within the basement because it has a large room that could be leased out.
So realistically, you're contesting the basement leasable area for the substandard basement area of around 3,400 square feet.
Yes.
Do you have any pictures of that space? Because you're the owner, you didn't bring any pictures to indicate.
No, I don't have any pictures.
Other question I have is any of the space, you say you have one tenant in the basement, is it owner occupied or arm's length?
And now there is no tenant at all. There is no tenant in the building now.
Who is the tenant in the basement?
It was a jewelry store that has shut down.
What, did you ownership or did you have ownership in it? Was there a relationship between that tenancy and yourself?
Yes, I had a relationship in that, but not ownership in that.
Okay, so so that rent would be then non-arm's length.
Pardon?
That rent would be then non-arm's length.
Yes.
Getting to the sale of the property, indicating that there needs to be some work put into it, and I agree there's a tenant fit if that's necessary. What have you put into your space over the last since you acquired in 2008 to make it marketable? Have you put any investment back into it while you had tenants in place?
In 2008, there were tenants in place when the building was purchased.
So typically owners put money back into the building to ensure that it's marketable as you move forward into the future to make sure you have tenancies and can obtain tenancies when ones leave. What have you put into the building since you purchased the building?
A new heating system. And there has been no requirement coming forth from any of the potential tenants who say what kind of improvements they would like. That whenever the brokers have presented, they have not been able to have a deal on the table because it was not accessible. There was no parking, but parking has been a big challenge coming to the building. The next door parking has been always very expensive. So that has been a big challenge for the building.
Would you not agree that there's ample parking? Many buildings like yours have no parking, but there's ample parking for exterior parking that's not on site in this location within walking distance, which is typical of this type of building.
There is a parkade next door to the building, but yes, there is.
Okay, all right, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
I did, but it was answered. Thank you.
I'm just saying, thank you very much.
I also have no questions. Do either party have a wish for a summation?
Other than I'm willing to go with 50% for vacancy, and I'll trust you can run the calculation for that to come to me. I just had to qualify what the vacancy was occurring on site before I
It's fine. Mr. Gupta, did you have a wish for a summation on your property?
Pardon, please come again.
Sorry, did you have any final words in regards to your property?
No, my only submission is that I would request the board to consider the difference in the calculation by the assessor and keep the value of the building at 2.1 million or even lower if it is possible. Thank you so much.
Right, I thank you. Thank you for your time this evening.
Sorry, Madam Chair, before we close this item, can I just go back to what the assessor said? Did you just say you'd go with a 50% vacancy?
No, 15.
15, thank you. That's why I was questioning because I didn't hear it right. Thank you.
No, sorry.
I was 15. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Gupta.
Thank you all. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
I think we're just going to take a quick 5-minute break.
Sure. Next one's easy to do this really.
I would like to call this meeting back to order. We are going to move on to the next item on the docket, which is 212 McDermott. Good evening, Mr. Reimer.
Good evening.
And if you would like to affirm, Mr. Reimer, please.
Mr. Reimer, please state your full name.
Carrie Wolf Reimer.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So we have a preliminary issue on this property. We have a non-co-op, Mr. Reimer, Mr. Holt.
Yes, Madam Chair, I can advise that we are not disputing the application of the non-compliance penalties in this case.
All right, thank you. But I would still like you to read that information regarding the non-compliance.
So I'll just start with the file number and so forth, and then I'll go straight to the non.
Yes, thank you.
File number is 22-1286. Roll number is 13-06-08-7000. It's for 212 McDermott. The assessment for the 2023 year is $1,421,000. There will be a reduction offered to come. But as far as the non-compliance, where the assessor asks for an approved duty placed on the applicant for non-cooperation for section 53(3)B of the Municipal Assessment Act, and if there's a reduction to be ordered, which there will be, that follow section 54(3.2). So if you start on page 13, this is the kind of the post tracking information. You see the signature on the bottom. You see the package that came along with it. This is the second mailer from 14 onwards. So you see that there was a COVID response that wasn't applied to, and it was also a blank that wasn't applied to as far as the defense questionnaire. So from that point in time, we're requesting a non-compliance penalty and a reversal bonus, obviously. And if you look on page 22, just to follow up, 2018 assessment, there was non-compliance sought as well for the same scenario, and it was awarded. So based on this property not complying with our request for information and expense forms, we're asking for the penalty to be applied.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, you didn't have any questions in regard to this issue, I'm assuming?
I have no questions nor comments.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions in regards to this?
I do not, thank you.
Mr. Marks?
Nor do I, thank you.
Nor do I. So we are confirming the non-co-options.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes,
I'll move on to the.
well, actually, Yes.
Right. Carrie wants to take over. Absolutely.
Mr. Reimer, if you would begin.
So, Madam Chair, in our main submission, we had requested a reduction in the 2023 assessment for the subject from $1,421,000 to $843,000. What I can advise the board is that Mr. Pohl and I have had a chance to review the matter a little further, and subject to Mr. Pohl's any corrections he might have, I believe we are making a joint recommendation at $1,098,000, with the caveat that, of course, the non-cooperation or the non-compliance penalties would apply to that reduction. I'm not sure. I know that Mr. Pohl and I typically would get to the same number, but we'd have slightly different methodology to get there. But at the end of the day, I would suggest the $1,098,000 for a revised value. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to agree with that.
All right. Did you have any questions, Ms. Knight?
I do not, thank you.
Nor do I, thank you.
So just one question, Mr. Reimer, then are you saying that your methodology is different on this item?
The methodology to get to the same number would be the valuation, put it this way, the valuation parameter assumptions that would be made by the respective parties might be a little different, but we arrive at the same number of $1,098,000.
Okay. Can I just ask you to go through those numbers, please?
I absolutely can. Could I have just a moment? And I will, and this is now It's going to be based fundamentally on a reduction in the NOI. That's where we might differ. I believe the cap rate that Mr. Pohl and I were reviewing would be very similar, but some of the methodology to get to the revised value above the NOI line would be a little different. So let me just pull this up.
Were you,
Sorry, I'm still working on,
that's okay. Were you saying a cap rate of 8.5?
actually the capitalization rate, again, using the methodology that I have come up with, the capitalization rate would be closer to 7.25.
7.25.
Yeah, this is actually a bit of a unique space, and I know that Mr. Pohl and I were discussing it. It's the Mayberry Art Gallery, and so it doesn't fit neatly into any of the categories. And so at the end of the day, the NOI that the revised NOI that we're suggesting would be in the range of 79,600, call it, with a capitalization rate of 7.25, and that brings you in at the $1,098,000. Again, some of the parameters above that line were differed between Mr. Pohl and myself, but there was an adjustment to the potential net rent. The vacancy allowance, I believe we both kept at 11%. Depending on the assumptions you make for some of those parameters, the non-recoverable expense item would be at 1%. I know the way that Mr. Pohl is and the department, the position they're taking, that's where the significant difference would be, where we were coming in at we'd be applying the higher non-recoverable expense, but that would be offset by the application of a higher market rent. So Madam Chair, I'm not sure, I don't want to get into the without prejudice discussions, but that fundamentally is based on the reduction in the NOI to roughly 79,600, with the application of the cap rate of 7.25, reflecting the fact that the building doesn't fall neatly into sort of the office categories as some of the other ones on the docket tonight would.
All right, I thank you. Did you have any questions?
No, I have no questions. Our methodology was a little different, but the number equated to this.
Yeah, and we'll hear yours in just a moment. Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
No, that answers mine for now.
And neither do I. Mr. Pohl, if you would like to go through your brief, please.
Sure. On page 1, built in 1901, effective age of 1972. I don't have pictures, but generally to describe it, you start from the main floor up. It's quite nicely finished, as you would see in our gallery studio for the main floor. Second floor, you walk up a set of stairs, same idea. When you go to the basement, it's more of a workshop, lunchroom area. They do their design, they do their artwork down there, and then they bring it up to display. So when you're looking at this property, it doesn't neatly fit into any category. So when we explored the rents, I looked at a rent of $12. I'm sorry, I'm not going to go through what's on the file. It's there for your leader to look at. I'll go to the recommendation when I see first. We looked, and I looked at the marketplace, and I felt in the main floor and second floor, it should be a $12, $13 rental rate put on it, and a $10 rental rate put on the basement. Vacancy 11% for vacancy. Non-recoverables, we have a 3%, shortfall at 8%, and then where I chose to make more of a reflection, and is I rarely will change the cap rate, but I changed the cap rate to 6.35 to reflect the carrying risk if this needed to go back to not an art gallery, converted back to an office building, that's an elevated risk. And that needed to be associated with what we're seeing here. So with that said, that's summated to 1,090,000 rounded. Our numbers are a bit different how we got to it, but I think it's fair, given the condition of the building and the use of the building, that you reflect the rents, which average to be $12.14, but with a higher cap rate to reflect the uniqueness of the building. So, not that it's in bad condition; it's in quite nice condition as you'd expect in an art gallery, but maybe so anyway, there's not too many art galleries that would rent for that. So it's private art gallery. So we had to be cognizant of the uses and if a potential purchaser would buy it, what would need to be converted, what would need to be put in place to turn it more into a. We can go since I went through the income analysis. I'll just roughly touch on the comparables and where we source that from. Where I source that from starts on page 4. I looked at an OFS marketplace, and because what we see here is a building that we would consider to be an OFS, 3 stories or less. But I also looked at more reasonably as downtown marketplaces and what I do the cross comparison most for what's there, because it's more of a retail, like Mr. Renner spoke to. It's not really an office building, it's not really retail space, it's an art gallery. So, you know, when we looked at the spaces in place for the OFS, which is more of the aspect of it, we have a $16 weighted average. And again, that's higher than I think it should be, but I had to explore that. They explore the OFD marketplace. That's a weighted average of $14.35 for the 2018 to 2020 market, which is more reasonable. But again, it's a bit of a smaller populace. We only have 18 series, at least up in that time frame, which is a little less. If we looked at the page 7, which is 2015 to 2017, we have 37 lease ups, so approximately double. And it indicated that weighted average of $11.44. So I think the jump from $11.44 to $13.45, which is approximately $3, is maybe a little on the steep side. So to be reflective of what's there, the overall $13.15 inclusive of the base layer, I thought was not quite in line with market. So I broke the areas out to where they were at 3,106 square feet for the upper and the main, $12 to $13 each, and then 1,048 square feet for the basement, which it should be at about $10. It's not storage space, but it's not office. It's more of a workshop. Nice, but it's what they do there. So the reflection of that, I think, the reduction to 1,098,000 is reasonable.
All right, thank you. Mr. Robert, did you have any questions?
Nope.
Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Lawrence?
No questions for me, thank you.
One quick question. Do you have an NOI?
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's
Probably
yeah,
did.
69,694. No, I probably did. The expense allowance for the shortfall and non-recoverable 3% is 8742. And then our effective marketing income, which would have been with the vacancy taken off, is 78,436. The vacancy allowance with 11% is 9694, and the PGI is 80,130. Makes sense. I don't want factors. It has to be the NOI first.
The cap rate was right.
Well, the cap rate was 6.35, which was an increase of 1 point. To reflect, again, I it's tough for me to say that this is in poor shape because it's not. It's in quite nice shape. But it's been in our gallery since I started working downtown. I'm sure it'll be in our gallery for as far as the future is we see. But the potentiality of a purchaser, unless you're going to use it for an art gallery continuing forward, you need to make some money on it and would need to convert it over because you're probably not going to have a marketplace for another gallery to rent. So that's the rationale for the increased risk and things.
And we are now going to, and thank you both for that. We're going to move on to 191 Lombard.
File number is 2250. Roll number is 13-06-07-25,000. Civic address is 191 Lombard. The 2023 assessment is for $3,660,000. Built in 1911, we have an effective year of the effective year built of 1950. It is 13 stories. It has a leasable area of 42,544 square feet. There is no on-site parking. Next page over, it sits on obviously Lombard and Main Street. I think we've all seen this building. So I believe there's works in the main floor, then obviously go up. It's the regular office and it's a small hotel only on the main floor. Before we get through it, I will go to which starts on page 10. They fill in their IE as far as electronically. That's why it's a little different since it's the format here. I apologize for the size, but I got to work with what they give us here. So what sticks out to me in my mind's eye is we have a tenant improvements of almost 15,000, and then we have two mortgage payments. I think it's about 14,000. Taking off the NOI, but the NOI is a negative 267,000. If you look over to my page 14, it comes in clear on their income statement, which they produce. So, as indicated, the one thing that glaringly sticks out, Ms. Barber agreed, is you have nearly $600,000 cost of maintenance or repair. It seems to stick out significantly from what you typically expect. The rents are gross, as you see on there on that tenant verification form on the next page. So from that point, you would think that when everything, whether it be gross or semi-gross or what have you, you would net out to the appropriate net operating income, but it quite frankly doesn't. So I'll leave it at that. Vacancy on the next page is on 17. We have approximately 3 CRUs that are vacant, which is 13,000 or 13% of the total area. And then from that point on, we have vacancy loss on page 18. Calculation there, as well as your code forms on page 19 and 20. It's a minor. So from that point, we'll look to the marketplace, which starts on page 4. As you can see, for the 2018 to 2020, we have 18 comparables, and we have an average at $14.13, a weighted average of $14.35, and a median of $15.08. Again, same as I just spoke to the other property BODs, that's more of a smaller populace of CRUs, but that's the reflection of what's in place. So I take a bit of a grain of salt because that is performing more. I think a C or a B- would be fulfilling that. So it does stick on my mind's eye a little bit. So hence the reason by bringing in 2015 and 17 comparables. Again, for 37 comparables, the average is $13.61. Weighted average is $11. Sorry, $11.61. The weighted average is $11.44, and a median of $11. So again, the analysis on either part, but I just think it's a pushing the envelope a little bit for the Northeast for the 2018 to 2020. So with that being said, we looked at the subject age of the property. All the characteristics are in place within our gamma system. So we came up with a lower range OFD than what you would think. So we have $9.64 overall rent, which produces a BGI of $410,407 Our leasehold, our vacancy at 15%, which is a standard parameter. Right at, the subject property is performing at 13, but overall our parameter of 50% I think is in line with this. Produces an effective gross income of $348,846. Our non-recoverable expenses are at 3%, our shortfalls at $8. Produces a net operating income of $287,328, and we cap that at 7.85%, which gives us a $3,660,000. Very straightforward analysis. It is lower than OFD, or OFD, I should say. I think around a $10 rent is reasonable, and without more further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions to Mr. Pohl?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Pohl, could we please initially start with your page 4, please? So these are the OFD rent comparables that you or the departments compiled for to sort of get a sense of the market in that time period, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, it's going to seem like a trite question, but so for instance, just take 233 Portage Avenue. That's the second comparable. So just up the road, if you head east along Portage Avenue, just up the road, you get to 201 Portage Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
You would not expect 201 Portage Avenue a rent indicator that's as low as the property just up the street to 233, 201 Portage being a Class A. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, they're going to perform differently.
Very, very different assets. So as I certainly over the years have been working with the office market, the downtown office market specifically, can we agree that there's historically been 4 categories of office properties? You've got Class A, Class B, Class C, and Class D. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
And what we've got before us tonight is a Class D building. I believe there's no dispute that this is an OD property.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, with the indicators that you've got on page 4, they range from 2018 to 2020. The subject property, though, is certainly a participant in the OFD market, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So can we turn, please, to your page 15? Now, I'm going to apologize to the board members and Mr. Pohl, not apologize, but Mr. Pohl's right. These figures are hard to read on the page. So Mr. Pohl, if you believe I'm misstating anything or misreading anything, please let me know. But I've gone through it carefully. I've blown up the image on my screen to make sure my tired old eyes have viewed it correctly. When you look at the lease start dates for the subject property, there are, in 2020 alone, there's a total of 6 leases and renewals. So the renewals being actual renewals and not step ups and not predetermined rates, but renewals in the subject in 2020. Would you agree with that statement?
I would agree with that, but you have to look at it from, is it a net basis or is it a gross lease basis? And they're gross leases.
They are indeed gross leases, Mr. Pohl. That doesn't disqualify them from the market. That's the very market in which this building and the OD buildings operate very typically.
I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is we do it from a net basis, as that is the typical what we're using.
Sure. Yeah.
Analysis to present based on gross lease marketplace. That is opportunity to present if we're doing it from a net basis. And if I see a lease that is gross, semi-gross, it's usually discounted and removed, unless I can find a relationship where it's reasonably put in. So in this case here, my analysis, as we've done throughout the A's through D's class buildings, have been on a net basis. So at that point.
But Mr. Pohl, I guess my concern is this. You're familiar, and I'll ask the question, I know you know the answer. You're familiar with the distinction between a gross lease and a net lease, correct? And so you're also very familiar, and you've been we've known each other for a few years now. You're certainly very familiar with the methodology you would use to calculate the actual net rent being achieved from a gross lease, correct, as well, correct?
That is one way to look at it, yes, but we're doing it, like I said, from a fee simple analysis. We're not looking at a leasehold analysis.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting, Mr. Pohl. But what I'm suggesting is that the department's completely ignored a fundamental player in the market for which a net rate is entirely capable of calculation based on the information on the form with many indicators in 2020. I gather what you're saying is because it wasn't presented to the department as, because it was, put it this way, because it was presented as a gross lease, which is what in fact these leases are, the department just chose to disregard them entirely?
For modeling purposes, yes, and as far as a market approach to being a net basis, I would not be looking at or exploring that unless I absolutely had to. But that analysis would be quite a different analysis. You have to reconcile the two approaches. So from my perspective, from a feasible basis, I think a net approach is the best way to go. When I'm looking at the marketplace as it's such and the lower than or D that we're looking at today, when we see a rent that is under $10, I think it's reasonable. When you look at the Johnson report, and you see what the market rents are for these properties, it's right in line with it. So I felt no need to explore converting gross to effective net leases analysis, if that's what you're asking for.
No. I'm not asking for an effective net rent like an NER, Mr. Pohl. Please don't misinterpret my comments. This is purely taking, and so I'm going to take a half step back because this is very important. And I'm a little surprised by the fact that the department's not accounting for gross leases in a Class D market. We can agree that what a gross lease, forget about base years for the moment. We can agree that what a gross lease is fundamentally is a single dollar amount paid, typically monthly, that includes both the rent for the space itself, but also includes all operating costs and taxes. That's fundamentally what a gross lease amounts to. Can we agree on that?
Yep.
Okay. So then by definition, I'd suggest to you, Mr. Pohl, and this is the reason for my surprise, by definition, if the department's provided with the information concerning those very costs of operating the property and the property taxes, so that one can quickly and easily calculate the net rental rate, not the net effective rate, but the just face net rental rate that's being achieved. But the department is choosing not to do that. That's what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, let me rephrase it answer it a different way. I'm not sure why you're surprised by it. I've never seen the department presented at a field at the Board of Revision level, and I've never seen it modeled as such. So this is standard practice from our perspective.
No. I'm Mr. Pohl, again, please don't misinterpret my comments. I am not in any way suggesting that the department's ever used a gross rent in the valuation. That's not at all what I'm suggesting.
Well, when you're surprised at looking at it, it over and included it in the model is what you're saying?
What I'm surprised about is that the department, when you've got a very significant asset, a Class D asset, that's fundamentally a very active participant in the Class D market. And when the department doesn't take the time to actually calculate the net rate after deduction from the gross rate of the property taxes and operating costs, and then include that net rate in both the model, which you're saying they haven't done, but then fundamentally to look at how the property is actually performing using that very simple methodology. If I'm understanding you correct, you're saying that that's not the department chooses. If it's a gross lease, the department chooses to ignore it pretty much entirely, and not do those calculations.
Well, I'm trying to explain, like, if we inclusive in the model, we look at the net rents, we pull it in. If you're going to take gross rent and you're going to convert it to a net rent, you could hypothetically include it in the model. It would inject a little bit of uncertainty, maybe not to the degree that you or I would have an issue with. But if you were to bring that in, I guess you can, but you'd still be looking at it from a model perspective from a marketplace perspective, and marketplace is fee simple, which is what we explored. The subject property, you'd be looking at least fee, a contract, contracts in place, which would be gross. So
No, so let's talk about that, Mr. Pohl, please. This whole leased fee versus fee simple, we can agree, and that was the very reason for my initial question, Mr. Pohl. If we go back briefly to your chart on page 4, if we could do that, please. Let's go back there just as a reference. And if I've misinterpreted this, then please correct me. But I gather the reason for the department and you've presented on page 4 quite a number of leases that were negotiated between 2018 and 2020 as a barometer, so to speak, of what the department considers to be the market for Class D assets. Is that not the entire purpose of these rents on page 4?
yes, I can. Is the marketplace for net rents. This is what we came up with for our source.
Right. And so,
and just so we're clear, I'm looking at 18 rents. They hover around a little more than $14. And I have a bit of a caveat on that, a bit of a pause, because that seems like a bit more strength to the marketplace than I would have expected. And that's why I went back to page 5 and I brought in what the marketplace was for the 3 years leading up to that, because quite frankly, I think when I reconcile the two, I think the jump's a little steep. But that's also why I brought these in. So I'm looking at both 6 years and going, markets are all generally increasing steadily. But this seems to be a bit more of a gap than I would have expected to see. So having said that, I also referenced the Johnson report, and I don't think a $14 rent is typical for what I would think this building would perform at. So when we see that the model produced a $9.64 rent, I thought that was more reasonable for the subject property. So having said that, we're looking at 6 years of data. I'm not suggesting that it's a $14 rent. I'm not suggesting that it is even $11.44. It should be hovering around $10 for this building, with the exception of the workspace, which is made for retail, high-end jewelry.
okay, but to go back to my original question, Mr. Pohl, the very reason for listing all of these rents is to provide the department's perspective on the market indicators for the Class D market as they might apply to this building in a general, like in a theoretical sense. That's the very reason for this evidence, correct?
In a theoretical, yeah. I mean, I do these charts, I do these analysis.
Yeah.
I give them out to the department, other assessors. I make it clear this is what it is, but please go through yourself. And if there's any discrepancies or if there's anything that you see that needs adjustment with the subject property, feel free. It's their opinion and value.
So, and again, you've made the distinction between leased fee and fee simple. So I do want to discuss this. The purpose, as I say, the purpose of this is this information on page 4 is to sort of provide the market indicators with a view to completing evaluation in fee simple for the subject property, taking into account all the market factors, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, and the same principle would apply to page 5 for the older leases. But it's for the same purposes, so I'm not going to belabor that. But we can agree, as I asked originally, we can certainly agree that fundamentally this subject building is a fundamental player within that Class D market, correct?
I'm not saying it's 13-story building. Obviously, it's on kitty corner to me.
It's an OFD building participating in the OFD market, real estate market for downtown Winnipeg. Okay, so we've got this OFD building, participating in the larger OFD market. We've got a valuation, and I didn't ask it, but again, I know that we agree. The valuation date the reference date for our valuation is April 1 of 2021, correct? Okay. So now, if we go back, and I'll start again, just very, very briefly. You've explained that the department doesn't use it, but let's go back to your page 15 regardless of whether the department considered these rents or not, can we agree that there were 6 leases and 2 lease renewals and 4 new leases negotiated in the subject in 2020?
Yeah,
And if I can, okay. And can we also agree that there was a further 5 leases negotiated in 2019?
and I'm not suggesting that at all.
Okay, so we've got a total, just in that 2-year period, we've got a total of 11. If the leases were net, put it this way, if the leases were net and not reported as gross, then is it fair to say that the department would have included at a minimum those 11 indicators in its valuation?
Most likely, depending on what they're in, if it looks like it's an outline rent higher, we'll pause on that, not inclusive and not included. But as long as it's performing in relationship to what we think the subject property is, if it's higher than average and it's better than D, of course we're talking D's, then we may include it, but it could be the opposite way where it's underperforming the marketplace by a significant amount or overperforming it. Condition aside, we would most likely not be including it as it'd be an outline rent.
Okay, but
Use in place might be a different use, maybe a retail rent, which is on the floor would be considerably more.
But Mr. Pohl, but I just want to pause there for a second. You're not suggesting. I won't refer to the page number. I'll go to it a bit later. But are you familiar with who the property manager is for the subject property? It's on, if you want to look, it's on your very last page. It's on the signature page of the COVID form. So if you look on the very last page of your brief at the bottom, there's an email address and it's got ashmanagementgroup.com.
Ash, sorry, I thought you were looking for the individual. No, I know it's Ash.
Okay, so you know it's Ash, and you understand they're one of the leading property managers and real estate investors in the city, and they're very sophisticated folks who understand the commercial real estate market and the office market well, correct?
I'm not discounting that at all.
Okay, and I didn't think you were, but it's important to understand this isn't a mom and pop shop operation. This is a professional property manager whose job it is to maximize returns. So again, we've got a total of 11 indicators within the building. Now, for the department's purposes then, because it was reported as gross, I take it the department didn't take them as valid indicators. And I'm going to ask the question, Mr. Pohl, because I've also been working with the office market and specifically C's and D's. Is it not your experience that with these lower class office properties, gross rents and semi-gross rents with base years and such are exceptionally common?
There is quite a few if you're asking that. Net rent is still obviously
Net rent's preferred, no doubt. If the landlord can get a net rent, Mr. Pohl, absolutely.
But there is existing buildings that are even in the B class marketplace. There's a few. Typically, I've done my OP studies, and there was a few. There's even a few gross, depending on the tenancies and the A's. Anything that would be gross to semi-gross, I'd be looking to redact from that.
Okay. Now, could we go then briefly though to the next page, which is your page 7. So this is, and again, this is going to be hard to read.
My page 7.
Your page 16.
Well, I'm gonna say 7's hard to read. I don't know.
Well, my eyes are bad, but they're not that bad.
I'm not to be combative, right?
Page 16. Thank you for correcting me. So
16. Yes, this is a little hard. I can't really read. This is the best I got. Even the that I got to begin with isn't that clear. That's why it shows up as such.
No, and I get it. That's not on you. That's a function of the small print. But I want to, and I'm happy to. I did, as I say, I had the advantage of blowing it up so that it's more legible. But I did want to go through this in light of your comments with respect to the gross leases in place, and we can agree. And just a quick half step back, we can agree that every single lease in this building is either a gross lease or semi-gross with base years. That's the information that you have as well, correct?
100%.
So then if we go to after the tenant and the area start and end date, stays occupied, lease type, then there's a column that says annual gross base rent. Can you see? It's about the middle of the page. So you can see that column.
Middle of the page.
Yeah, the column that's entitled annual gross base rent.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I'm going to read this number because it is difficult to read. At the very bottom of that column, the total figure that is shown there is 715,834.
That'd be about right. I can read this.
Okay. Again, it's very hard to read, but I'm reading from the blown up copy. Now, then to the immediate right, and because the key being the headers more than anything else, on the next column you can see BY CAM, and in the column to the right of that, BY tax. You see those two? Exactly. You've got it exactly right. Those are base year CAM and tax. So we can agree that what's the calculations that are being made there are for those tenants that have, they're not on fully gross leases, but they're on semi-gross with base year provision.
Mhm.
And we can agree that what, and again, Madam Chair, I don't presume to know what the board members may or may not, how much exposure they've had to base year concepts. So I'll just quickly go through it with Mr. Pohl. And if Mr. Pohl, if you disagree with what I'm suggesting, please let me know. But where you've got a semi-gross lease with a base year, what that entails is a rent that's being paid, which is inclusive of a certain level of expense. And that level is determined by the base year itself. So for instance, if I've got a 2015 base year, my base year costs that are included in my rent are the base year CAM and taxes for the property in that base year for 2015. But then any costs above that base year, those would be recovered. Do you think that's a fair representation of what a base year is?
In general, yes. In general, yes.
Okay. So then if we go back to the same page, the column after the BY tax column, that's then another column that says annual BY net base rent. And these are a lot of terms that this person reported.
304,135.
Yeah, 524,135. So that then, and again, Mr. Pohl, please let me know if you disagree, but the way I look at it, that's the number that would be the gross rent minus just the base year costs. Do you think that's okay? And then right beside that, you've got two more columns, gross CAM and gross tax. And can we agree that those would represent those leases that are entirely on a gross basis, not base year, but fully gross, those would represent the gross lease costs under the leases for those tenants, correct?
Yeah.
And then finally, we get to the next column, which says gross base rent. And that gross base rent amounts to 266,988, if that number makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the number then, Mr. Pohl, that after all those segmented calculations, and I do believe the manager was trying to be very concise with how they're getting to their numbers, that is effectively the calculation that's been done on the face of this form to show the true net rent that's being received prior to any free. I'm disregarding free rent and such. I'm not factoring that in. But that is the figure that the department could use with a high degree of precision to calculate the net rents on the subject, correct?
Yeah, but I mean, that's also a relationship as far as when you do it from a net effect of any cost increases transmitted back to the tenant. Whereas this case, not going to get that. You're going to have a base year that's frozen. There's a different level of risk to it.
Well,
right?
but I don't agree that. I mean, it has to be recalculated every year, and so I certainly agree with that. But at the same time, this represents fundamentally the market in which I'd suggest this building's operating, in that the tenancies they're able to secure for this building, and as you and I discussed earlier, for a lot of the OCs and ODs, actually, in my experience, certainly the vast majority, these are the lease structures for this asset class, gross or gross with base here.
Like, can I just kind of get to where you're basically essentially saying you feel the best market indicator is the leases that are in place, which is something that all this has been said for a long time. So that's generally what you're indicating here.
Well, no, but it's not as simple as that, Mr. Poole, because I'm not looking at a 2002 lease or 2010 lease. I'm looking at the calculation for net rents for leases in the subject, being an asset in which, you know, that's a fundamental player in this OD market, that were negotiated in the very timeline that you've presented comparables that bear no reflection to the rents being achieved, the net rents being achieved. There's 11 comparables between 2020 and 2019. So my question to you is, through all of this, are you still of the view that the net rent, which is shown on the face of the document here, the net rents being achieved, would it not be appropriate to apply those net rents in the valuation of the subject, given that the overwhelming majority of the indicators, I shouldn't say the overwhelming majority, the majority of the indicators were actually negotiated in 2019 and 2020, and all the indicators but one were negotiated between 2015 and 2020.
If you're looking at it from a big, like I explained, you can look at that if you want from a leasehold analysis, but let's look at it from a different way. If these were reported as net, we would still be going with market. We look to the relationship of what's going on within the building, but also contrast it against market. And if it's all things being equal, it's relatively the same, okay. But I would still, the test would still be what market is, not.
Exactly, but we're agreeing with that, Mr. Poole, and that was my question earlier, as to if you were familiar with Ash Management, sophisticated managers and investors.
Let me phrase it a different way. If I do a marketplace analysis on a net rent basis and say the subject property was net rent, my marketplace analysis came to X amount, and if this was $1 less than X amount or $1 more than X amount, I wouldn't be asking for the increase by $1 based on the subject, nor would I be offering a reduction based on $1 less performing. The gap is not too far, so it's relatively performing that market. I'd be putting in market. What I'd be looking for is whether there's a an extreme end of that. You know, why is there an extreme end of that? In this case here, I don't see the rationale to go when I'm looking at the marketplace, and it seems to be for a lower NB about $10, and we're in at 9, or we're a little under that at 9.64. That there's any, it's not even a moment of pause in my mind. So I move on from that point. It's right at market for the effective for the net as it place, and then we move on. The only question I would have on the overall of the building would be that retail space for Works. If it still is Works, maybe it still Works. Typically that would be higher than that, but in this case, the overall bill around $9.64. I'm quite comfortable with taking that.
But Mr. Poole, I'm going to summarize all of what you just said in prior. So on the one hand, you've got the market information, which you submitted on page 4. It's all well and good. But on the other hand, you've completely excluded this subject. And hence was my initial question. Remember, it sounded like a silly question, but it was asked for a purpose. My initial question to you was, you wouldn't expect the same rent in the 201 Portage as you would for your comparable for just up the street on Portage Avenue, which is a D building. Well, of course not. But within the Class D market, Mr. Poole, we're establishing the market value, and certainly, and I appreciate you submitted the evidence that using the net rents that were reported, well, all well and good, except I'm suggesting to you, Mr. Poole, you fundamentally disregarded the very indicators that you believe should be applied within the subject itself. The concept is precisely the same. You wouldn't expect 201 and 239 Portage to have the same rents. You cannot expect a small segment, a very specific cross-section of what's been reported as net rents for some other buildings to necessarily be reflective of this building. And then going further, having disregarded the gross rents because of the nature of their structure. Okay, I don't accept the premise, but that's what you've done. But then to disregard it, even though those very same indicators are in the exact same timeline that you've presented for your comps, being 2019 and 2020? Are we not valuing, we're valuing the property in fee simple, Mr. Pohl? Completely agree. Do you think any prudent investor is going to look at every other building other than the subject property that he's investing in, where he has very concise indicators very close to the reference date, as closer than the comps in the other buildings? Do you think that's reasonable?
What you're sounding is you're just indicating that it should go to leasehold contractors. You feel it's
No, I'm not. I disagree. I'll you know what, Mr. Pohl, I've flogged this long enough. We'll continue on. I do not fundamentally to look at a rent that's negotiated very near the reference date within the subject is not leased fee. That's a market indicator. Now, so moving on. The rest of the questions should be reasonably quick and painless, Mr. Pohl. The capitalization rate is 7.85%, and we're agreeing this is, if you recall, this is a Class D building, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and recall that notwithstanding some recent additions, I'm still categorizing fundamentally the downtown office market as having 4 segments, top being Class A, and then you've got Class B, Class C, and then you've got the bottom segment, which is what we're talking about here, Class D, correct? And the department hasn't provided you with the specific information concerning Class D transactions or any of the transactions as to how 7.85% was calculated in this case, correct?
No, that would be for modeling. I don't have any comparables to show for it.
Fair enough. That's modeling. I expected that answer. Can we go then briefly though to your page 8, please?
Sure.
So on page 8, we have the chart, the department, and I'm very familiar with this chart. I'm sure we all are. The chart of the various property types, and what we can see, Mr. Pohl, with the information that has been submitted, we've got a downtown A, the city of Winnipeg. Now I'm just looking at those columns. We've got the downtown A proposed cap rate or model cap rate of 6%, and then we've got the downtown B at 6.75%. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a 75 basis point difference between the A's and the B's being much better quality buildings, correct?
That's what is indicated, yes.
Yeah. And so now we are, though, to be clear, further to my previous questions, we're not only not at the segment below it, which is a Class C, we're 2 segments below it at a Class D, 2 segments below the Class B office market, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, and it's not, it's because of the limited information you've been provided, but when you've got a 75 basis point jump from Class A to Class B, and then you've only got roughly from the departments, and I understand I'm not trying to be unfair, Mr. Pohl, because I know this is a modeled rate, but it doesn't make sense that you would then go from a 675, which is at a much superior B property, you'd only go up 110 basis points for a Class D property to get to your 7.85% cap rate, given that the cap rate between the 2 top classes is 75 basis points in and of itself.
If you look from just generalities, sticks out of my mind's eye is if you're looking at a Class A building, you're looking at $100 million building, your players within the marketplace are relatively few compared to a building that's valued at $3.5 billion. You have much more demand for it. Same way as you go to the Class D or Class B, you get heavy investment players be looking at these properties, and you have a limited amount of market that you'd be transacting with. But if you're going to have Class Bs and you're looking to purchase a property, there's a significant amount more people that would be able to compete for a $3.5 million building versus a 100 plus or $50 million plus, whatever your upper end.
Well, I guess I'd express a bit of a concern with that, Mr. Pohl, because the other thing we can, and I'll be talking about this more, but we can agree that, of course,
I'm getting at.
I'm sorry?
Talking generalities is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is the reality of the market. You're looking at a REIT, you're looking at an investment fund, you're looking at a major purchaser to purchase those upper end properties. Whereas you don't see too many rezoning fees.
Exactly, and they're not investment grade qualities, and I agree with that these are not investment grade buildings by most standards. I totally agree, but I guess I'd suggest, Mr. Pohl, you know, you've potentially got people with access to a level of capital that would be less than the REITs and be possible players, but we can agree that the environment in which this building was operating, as they all were, was within the very much firmly within the pandemic, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I will have more to say about that later, because I don't agree with the premise that somehow this building, because it's lower valued overall, would attract a significantly higher level of interest as an investment. I'd actually suggest in the pandemic environment it would be the reverse. There's no parking stalls associated with the subject. You've mentioned that briefly, and that's the department's information as well, correct? Okay. Now the last point, and I know this is an ongoing debate, Mr. Pohl, between the department and ourselves, among others, the model valuation for the subject, and I'm now back at page 6, but you don't need to turn there, you'll know it offhand. The model parameter for all non-recoverable expenses is 3% of effective gross income, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now we can agree though, and I'm going to go to the more legible copy now. If we go to your page 14, this is the more legible income statement rather than the computer one that was populated. So the non-recoverable expenses, and Mr. Pohl, you've heard this from us ad nauseum, certainly the categories of expenses we're including in our analysis relates to leasing commissions, professional fees, and advertising marketing. So we can agree that in taking a snapshot, and please be clear, I'm not suggesting this is a stabilized amount. I'm taking the snapshot based on the evidence you've provided. But we can agree that the total of the leasing commissions, which were 11,541, and the professional fees, which were 20,648, that's in very rough terms, it's about $32,000, which would be significantly higher just on those items alone than the 3% that the department's applied, correct?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Again, I don't want to get into the debate here. We include things that you include things that case law outlines not to. Leasing commissions are one of them. It's black and white. They need it not together. I could bring in as many case laws I've seen, but if you're including stuff like that we would not, you're going to have a difference in value, or sorry, difference in non-recoverable. Non-recoverable.
Yep.
So
Understand.
The arguments are different. And just so we're clear, leasing commission, tenant inducements, tenant allowances, free rent, all things that could be included in non-recoverables, we don't include. So when I review 25 plus years of case law, and I haven't seen one municipal order that says included. I don't until I see an argument that presented by an agent where there was one, or a new argument where the argument shows deference to an existing case law and then separates that to a new argument as to why. Maybe there's a rationale that you can go with. So then it's like arguing, from my mind's eye, it's like arguing post-reference information or comparable assessments. Case law speaks to it. We don't do it.
Yeah, so it's a different interpretation, Mr. Pohl, and we are very much looking forward to the debate at the municipal board to clarify the issue. I think all parties want that. But my question was related to just the quantum of those expenses. I'm not asking you to agree, but just mathematically then, forget about the concept of what it is or isn't or should be or should not be deducted. Mathematically, the addition of those two expense items would equal more than 5%, correct?
I'm not denying that, yeah.
Yep. Now, the very last question then on page 14, you alluded to this, you were very forthright in your comments that the property operated at a loss of $278,934 in 2020, the year prior to the reference date, correct? And the total of the mortgage payment, because there's two mortgage payment interest expenses included in that, the total of those two, and I'm going to round it off, it's just under $30,000, correct? And so after taking those out, because we can all agree that they shouldn't be included, then our net, the loss, the net loss after taking those out is roughly 248,000, correct?
Generally, yes, I'll trust your numbers.
Okay. Madam Chair, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
The only question I have is, it's a twofold. Did you go to this property? Have you seen this property recently?
Not recently, but I've been in it over the years.
And do you have pictures of the interior?
No, I don't have any on file.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marks.
One question, there was a big maintenance tab here of almost $600,000.
I couldn't tell you. It's stuck out in my mind's eye too. It seems like it's seems about maybe 300,000 higher than what I would expect on an annual basis.
Right.
So it does seem to be quite high. I checked permits. I didn't see any rationale. There's nothing that matches up.
There was no permits issued or
Nothing that I found. Sometimes PPB has different set of permits that we would get on our end, or maybe they might take a while. Like this was done in 2020, so they're like
maybe a fit out on the floor or something like that.
well, tenant fit up I wouldn't be including this. They could be including it as far as maintenance and repair, but usually you would see that as tenant improvement, tenant fit up, or in the non-recoverable side of things. Usually maintenance and repair is ongoing. Year to year, you can stabilize it out.
Right.
Sometimes maintenance and repair, you'll see this where it's performing as such, and then there'll be a large chunk. And that might be a capital investment, capital improvement, where they just threw it in.
Right.
From their perspective, from an ownership perspective, I'm not sure they really care what this less is here and there. They're just running the business, right? So it may show up to them as in their eyes as maybe repair work, but the other for us.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
One question.
Sure.
Everybody's favorite, the cap rate. So your cap rate of 7.85, completely model-driven.
Yes, it is.
So did you take into consideration the build of the building, 1911, and effective age of 1950?
No, unless I see something out of line, like this is such a debilitated state with dysfunctional access, and there always usually is an OMD, like there's a measure of functional obsolescence and all of it. That's the point where it creates a barrier to coming into marketplace where there needs to be capital investment to correct that. I may be looking at a higher risk there, but I don't see any of that here. You can see it's near low down by buildings, so clearly there is no barrier to market.
Right. Questions? Thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've lost Mr. Pohl, so I'm going to wait for him to come back.
You didn't live for long.
Okay, a couple of quick comments just to Mr. Pohl's last replies to some of the questions. I'm actually fully in agreement, and you're going to hear from me. I'm going to go further on that large repair and maintenance expense in 2020 of $588,000. To be clear, I'm agreeing that's not an amount that I would suggest the board should stabilize, but neither is it. Obviously, you've got an older building here, and there are substantial ongoing repairs and maintenance amounts that are spent year in and year out. 588,000 is too high, and what I heard Mr. Pohl say, Mr. Pohl, sometimes my headphones seem to be cutting out a bit, but what I heard you say, I think, was that you thought it was about $300,000 too high. And I agree. And as I say, I'm actually going to suggest it's even a bit more than that too high. The other comment that was made related to whether tenant improvements were included in it, and I can say categorically no in that amount of 588,000. And I wanted to be clear on this. If we could turn initially then to my submission on page 19. And this is the very same income and expense form that Mr. Pohl had submitted. So it's the very same form. On page 19 in the middle column, you'll see the various expenses listed there, and these expenses reconcile precisely to the operating statement. And within there, where about halfway down the expenses column, there's something that says other, and then it says specify. That's where the mortgage interest amounts are shown, but as shown there, that's also where the tenant improvements landlord work is shown. It's separated out. It's 14,691, I believe. And that, though, as you can see, if you just go 3 lines up, the full maintenance and repair amount of 588,000 and change is shown on there. So I can say definitively that amount of 588 doesn't include the tenant improvement work. It's listed separately.
And just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that. I'm just saying non-recoverable. When you look at permits there, you can see that, you know, they're just throwing in sometimes it's not significant.
Yep. No, I understood what you were saying, and I understood you to say you didn't know, but I wanted to clarify. I actually the record, the information submitted does show that it's separated out. I do want to talk, so I'm going to provide just and ask the board and Mr. Pohl to indulge me a bit. I want to talk just a wee bit about this concept of leased fee versus fee simple, because we are in, and I'm going to be very clear with this, we're in absolute agreement what our job here this evening to value this property is. It's a fee simple valuation based on a specific valuation date called the reference date of April 1, 2021. Okay. Recall, Madam Chair, that my questions included, there was a lot of questions I'd asked Mr. Pohl, and he was forthright in his answers. A lot of questions I'd asked about the market comparables that he's presented, which were, I gather, reported on a net lease basis. But then, because of the very structure of the leases in this building, which are very common in Class D and Class C buildings, being the gross lease and the semi-gross lease of base years, they're actually very much the exception, based on my experience, very much the exception to the rule with these lower class buildings, particularly Ds, but also Cs, is to actually be able to achieve a net rent with operating costs and taxes above it. And there's a very good reason for that. When you're talking about these very, these older buildings, the operating costs are very, very high by definition. Year in and year out. The utility costs, they're inefficient. The maintenance and repairs, they are just high. So the only option the landlord has in order to entice the tenants to come into these kind of buildings is to provide them with, at best, the gross leases with base years, or much more commonly still, pure gross leases, because the tenant doesn't want to have this exposure to these extremely high operating costs. And that's by definition the nature of the market. So notwithstanding the department's concerns with converting the gross leases to an actual net rate, not a net effective, that concept is, I think we can all, I think Mr. Pohl would agree, I'm not suggesting a net effective rent. But what I am absolutely suggesting is one has to look at the market indicators in the subject, and it's a very simple conversion from a gross lease to get to a net rent. And these indicators were within the very same time period. The majority of the indicators are in the very same time period as the time period presented by Mr. Pohl in his comparables on page 4. They're in 2019 and 2020. Recall, Madam Chair, that I'd suggested that we take a brief look at who's submitting this information, who the manager is. It's Ash Management. This is a top flight, top shelf property management firm. They are sophisticated, they know what they're doing, and their job is to maximize the returns on the investment of this building. If they had any opportunity to start negotiating net rents, very clean and pure net rents, they would do it in a heartbeat. They can't. If they could do it, they would have done it. Recall, Madam Chair, when I went through the questions, there were a total of 6 leases and lease renewals done in 2020. You can't get better evidence of market than that. These were third party, obviously professionally negotiated leases by professional managers and brokers. So when you're talking about a fee simple valuation, that is the best indicator of the market in fee simple for the subject property. So then without those comments in mind, if we could turn briefly to page, and I'm gonna, because of this is obviously taking a bit of time, I'll go through it as briefly as I can. If we start on page 6, please, with the subject, and you've got a photo there. Looks like a little distorted, but it's a photo of the subject property located at the corner of Lombard and Main. Older building built in 1911 with an effective age of 1950. There is, of course, that effective age of 1950. There's, by definition, if you want to get any tenants at all, you have to keep the building in some semblance of order, and so that the 1950 age would reflect the ongoing work that's been done since the thing was constructed. It's been designated as a grade 2 historic resource, which does, in our respectful submission, certainly add an element of risk. The historic designation will carry with it very specific requirements as to what you can and can't do and the approvals you need to get, and certainly based on our experience, that adds an element of risk with the subject. So if we turn then, fundamentally, there are 3 differences of opinion in the valuation. The first one, which is probably the most significant, relates to the potential net rent to apply. Pardon me. The second one relates to the quantum of the non-recoverable expense. In the scheme of things, that's actually a minor concern, but we are certainly presenting it. And then thirdly, the capitalization rate. So on page 13, we've listed there the potential rent that we're suggesting is $334,595. As you can see, it's based on the rental information that we've provided there, including all the comparables I talked about in 2020, 2019, and 2018. There was only 3 leases, one in March of 13 for the Burke space, and one in July of 16 for unit 900, and another in May of 15 for unit 1000. The remainder of the leases that were negotiated were from 2017 and onwards, with several negotiated in 18, 19, and 20. Those, to be clear, in our respectful submission, represent the very best evidence of what this property can achieve. Pure and simple. A fee simple valuation that ignores the realities of the building and those very, very clear indicators within the building itself, very near the valuation date, is simply not tenable. So we've applied, as you can see there, we've applied what I believe is an optimistic market rent, but nonetheless, we've applied the rate at $850 a square foot for the vacant units, as well as for unit 1001, there was a net rent that was actually 75 cents a foot. We've, notwithstanding that rate, we've applied a rate of $850. That was on a very short-term lease after the space had been vacant. Very short-term lease of a year on that one. So that's the potential rent we've got. We've got a market vacancy allowance of 15%. As Mr. Pohl has correctly pointed out, the actual was just a tick over 13%. The actual the year prior was actually, I believe, 17%. I'll go through that in a second. So the average over the 2-year period is actually very, very consistent with the market allowance supplied of 15%. Going then to page 14, we've applied a shortfall rate of $8 a foot for reasons we'll discuss briefly shortly. We're suggesting the non-recoverable expense allowance of 5%, and then the 2% for the structural reserve, what's historically been known as the other expense. And we're suggesting for this Class D office building with the historic designation, we're suggesting a capitalization rate of 8.5%. So then moving to page 15, working through using all of those valuation assumptions, we come in at a requested value, pardon me, of $2,507,000. Pardon me. If we might turn then to the attachments to my page 23, please. So on page 23, as I've mentioned earlier, there was actually the property operated at a substantial loss of $278,933, $279,000, call it. Recall, Madam Chair, that I'd suggested that the repair and maintenance expense, I'm agreeing that $588,000, I believe, is not an appropriate amount that an investor would stabilize. But having said that, what I am, and based on, I'm going to walk the board very briefly through the previous year's statements. I'm actually convinced between those two statements and then reviewing some of the other years that a $200,000 stabilized amount, that does make a lot of sense. It's even a little bit lower, I think, than what Mr. Pohl had, and I recognize he was not talking specifics, but I believe a $200,000-ish allowance would be very much in line with the performance of the property. But what that leaves you, Madam Chair, even if one takes that assumption, it leaves you with a net operating income that's well under $200,000, well under that. If one looks then very briefly at the previous year's income statement, and this is now on my page 34. On my page 34, as you can see at the bottom of the page, the results were a whole lot better for that year, but we're still talking about a net income that's only 82,000. When you add back in the two mortgage interest amounts, which total, call it 38,000, you're still only at $120,000, and that's now with a maintenance and repair expense of only 220,000, much lower. And that 200,000 to 225,000 range has been very consistent through the years, and the reason I'm bringing all this forth is I'm not suggesting, obviously, the property operated a huge loss in 2020. Some significant work was done on maintenance and repairs, but that's still leaving you at less than $200,000. The previous year operating income, when you adjust for the mortgage interest amounts, you're still way under $200,000. And the net operating income, contrast that with the net operating income that I've calculated at $213,000. We believe we're being very fair and actually very optimistic. What that goes into then is to look at the element of risk, and certainly at the 8.5% cap rate, we believe that's very fair in the context of our calculation of an NOI that far exceeds the performance of the property in 2019 and 2020, even after adjusting for all of these items. And that cap rate at 8.5% reflects that, in addition to the fact, that it is an older building. It's got the historic designation with the sort of difficulties that entails, and we believe the 8.5% is very appropriate in those circumstances. If one turns to page 25, actually, if we could start with page 24. This is the very same information Mr. Pohl provided. This is the 2020 income and expense mailer that Ash Management sent in. Recall, Madam Chair, that I'd asked Mr. Pohl about all of the lease indicators within the subject, and there being, and I reiterate this, there were 6 leases and 2 lease renewals and 4 other leases negotiated in 2020, representing bar none the best evidence of what this property is able to achieve. And those lease renewals, the 6 lease renewals in 2020 and then another 5 in 2019, so 14 renewals and leases in a building that's got that's representing the vast majority of the tenancies in the building. So, and again, of course, there are gross leases and gross leases with base year, which is what this market, the Class D market, fundamentally is based upon. So if one then turns to the next page, on page 25, and this is, I'll give the board, because it is difficult to read, in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th column from the right, this is the column I referred to earlier in my questions of Mr. Pohl. It's the gross base rent column. Forget the word gross, because that's misleading. What this calculation is under this column of base rent is the true net rents being achieved after deduction of both base year costs and gross lease costs. So that figure is $266,988. If there's a figure to the right that's slightly lower at $258,064, that's the figure after one deducts free base rent, free CAM, and free tax. And I'm not suggesting for our purposes that we consider that, but That works out to then a rent of only $7.21 a square foot. And when you run the same calculation of the 266,988, and you take out those free rent provisions, now you're at an average net rent of $7.46. That represents, with all these leases that were negotiated and renewed in 2019 and 2020, that is the best indicator of the market, of the fee simple valuation with the market for this property. That actual rate of 746, incidentally, my rate of $8.40, as I mentioned, I thought the rate was, I'd suggest the rate's a bit optimistic. My average rate is $8.40, and significantly higher than the average of what they were actually achieving in 2020. The other thing I want to point out when we're talking about the trends, and I know Mr. Cole talked about the Burke space, but I did want to point something out to the board. On my page, I'm going back to it now, it's my page, the very page we were on, page 25. So Burke's is on the main floor, and they are the first two entries, the first two rows on this chart. As you can see there was actually a lease, and I didn't reflect this in my rent roll, I only picked up on it after the fact. There was a lease for unit, and we're now talking about unit 100. There's a lease for unit 100 with Burke's, 3,187 square feet, under a lease that was commenced on March 1st, 2018, so not that far removed from the reference date, and that ended on May 31st of 2020. And it had as you can see a few columns over, the lease type was gross with a base year of 2007. So when you go all the way to the right-hand column, with the base year provision as it was at that time, the actual net rent collected was around $18 a foot. But here's what happened, and this is a reflection, I believe, of both the building but also of the pandemic, quite bluntly. There was a lease change in rent, and that's a function of the circumstances involving them. That started on June 1st of 2020, and it now converted to a fully gross lease. That fully gross lease, when one goes to the right, the effect of that is to reduce the net rent that's actually achieved on this space to $9.53 a square foot. So when you're talking about sort of the impacts of this building and the trends and how the real estate market is operating and the fee simple valuation, if I'm seeing a reduction nearly in half from the Burke space on the main floor, that's a pretty solid indicator that this property is in some difficulty, exacerbated, I'd suggest, by the situation with this particular retail tenant. Incidentally, we've applied a net rent. What the average of the two, if one looks at what was actually happening in that 12-month period, the average is about 14, and it's about 1475 actually. We've applied, or 1450, I should say. We've applied 1463. So, notwithstanding the actual rate, which was lower under that renegotiated lease starting in June 1st of 2020, we've applied the average of the two blended rates at 1463. So with all of that in mind then, we could turn very briefly, and I will be brief because it's 10 to 8, and I'm sure we don't want to listen to this for a long time, but if we could look briefly at the non-operating or the non-recoverable expense study. And I'm going to go over this very succinctly. So Madam Chair, let me know when you have it.
Everybody has it?
Just
Okay.
getting there. Hang on.
Recoverable report. I think it's worth from.
I see the rebuttal, the agenda, the docket. Where is it?
It's third down, applicant expense study.
Okay.
Ah, there we go. Got it. Thank you.
All right. So turning conceptually, of course, the board's heard this many times. Conceptually, we remain convinced that there are some non-recoverable expenses that must be accounted for. totally understand where Mr. Pole's coming from with respect to the previous municipal board decisions. Those decisions typically were based on a request to effectively calculate a net effective rent, take full dollar for dollar, take the tenant inducements, take the free rent, take the leasing commissions and these things off the top line number, the potential net rent number, to come in at a net effective rent, and that's not what we're doing. We are suggesting, though, that the allowance, a stabilized allowance to reflect these expenses, is certainly remains appropriate. That was the original intent, remains appropriate. And as Mr. Pole alluded to, it's certainly an issue that's going to have to be debated at the municipal board, and we're looking forward to that debate. In the meantime, we do remain convinced that the 5% allowance should be applied. At the bottom of page 2, this is from the department's earlier manuals, and this is at the second last paragraph, the indented paragraph, and it just states the concept clearly. It says, even with net leases and competent management, there'll still be expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable. Examples are processing payments and chasing bad debts in our respectful submission, things like professional fees, marketing, advertising, and leasing commissions as well. I'm going to, again, because we've all heard it many times before, I'm going to go to at the bottom of page 4. Again, the second last paragraph on that page. This is from the case studies and appraisal. This is appraisal theory. And it states there, the appraisal should also account for non-recoverable expenses. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. The other costs associated with leasing space is leasing fees or commissions. So again, for the structural allowance, that's in the way that we've applied the valuation, that relates to the 2% quote unquote other allowance. The 5% though would include the leasing commissions and the space marketing costs. If we go briefly to page 7 then, and this is from the Saskatchewan Appraisal Guide, and they actually list 4 different expense items that they're saying are not recovered from tenants. And those are legal audit and audit fees, structural repairs, advertising and promotion, and leasing commissions. So again, in the case of structural repairs, we believe that's covered off by the 2% allowance, but the other 3 items are non-recoverable expense items that are included in our analysis. If we then turn to page 10, please. So as indicated on page 10, roughly middle of the page, there's 4 expense items that we've included in our analysis. There are leasing commissions, professional fees, asset management fees, and advertising. And the asset management fees are very uncommon. They're actually, for the most part, not at all included in the analysis, but there are a couple of properties where they are. But for the most part, it's just the 3 items: leasing commissions, professional fees, and advertising marketing. Page 11, we've got the chart, and I stress this, we've provided the board for their information only. The right-hand column includes tenant inducements, which with much higher stabilized figures as one might expect, but we're not relying on that. We're relying on the second from the right-hand column that talks about, or that has completed the analysis. It incorrectly states 3 years. It's actually, I've updated it, and it's typically between 4 and 5 years. And it has resulted in an average rate of 6.64% to and a median rate of 5.98%. So you can see there's a lot of variation among the different properties, and that stands to reason. The variations among properties, but also even within a given property, the variation from year to year can be very, very substantial. That's a function of the fact that in some years, most landlords will actually report as an expense the entire leasing commission for a lease that's either secured or a lease renewal that's done. They'll report it in the year that the expense is incurred. A few actually match the expense to the revenue, and they spread the lease, the commission expense, I should say, over the term of the lease, but most of them report it all in the single year, which will lead to very significant fluctuations. If you've got a building with a significant vacancy and the broker is then paid in that year for securing the tenant, that will result in an expense that's much higher than 5%. But the next year, if there's no vacancy, it'll be obviously much lower again. So Within that, though, we concluded that the 5% allowance that had historically been provided was indeed appropriate, and we're asking the board to restore it. Starting on page 12, then, in the alternative, if the board chooses to reduce the non-recoverable operating expense allowance from 5% to 1%, and recall, Madam Chair, my question to Mr. Pohl as to the non-recoverable expense allowance, it is at 3%, which is the model-driven rate and the rate applied by the department. So in this scenario that this example that I'm giving you, it is based on 3 different scenarios. One where the full 5% allowance is applied along with the 2%, so the total non-recoverable expense allowance from all sources will be 7%. The second scenario is where the 5% allowance is reduced to 0. So effectively, the only non-recoverable expense allowance is at 2%. And the last scenario, which is what the departments applied for the 2023 assessment, that scenario is where the 5% allowance is reduced to 1%. So the total non-recoverable expense allowance is 3. So on page 13, starting at page 13, I've provided 3 scenarios, all using precisely the same assumptions as to purchase price, net operating income, right from the top line of the valuation all the way through to the purchase price. The very same assumptions, save and except for differences in the non-recoverable expense item. Page 13, we can see there, based on those assumptions as they're listed, that the capitalization rate that's indicated based on the full 5% allowance is 7.38%. Then if you turn to page 14, if one reduces the 5% allowance down to 0, the mathematical effect using the very same assumptions for the entire remaining work up there, as you can see, the cap rate actually goes to 7.79%. So that's an increase of just over 40 basis points. For our purposes, the more relevant example is probably on page 15. This is the case where the non-recoverable expense allowance is reduced from 5% to 1%, such that the total non-recoverable expense allowance is 3%. And that has the effect of changing the indicated cap rate from 7.38% to 7.71%, a 33 basis point difference. So my reason for presenting all of this to you is that if one chooses, and this is certainly within the board's prerogative based on the evidence presented, if one chooses to reduce the non-recoverable expense allowance to 1% from 5%, then our request would be to increase the capitalization rate by 25 basis points. As I just shown, the mathematical difference is closer to 32 or 33, but we're just suggesting the 25 basis point increase if one uses the 1% as the non-recoverable expense allowance. So then very briefly, if we can finally go to the office capitalization rate study, please. And Madam Chair, if you might let me know when you're there.
I am. Is everyone else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can go, and again, I'm going to, I know that Mr. Pohl and the board members are quite familiar with this. If we can go initially to page 5, please. So this is pre-pandemic. We've got a lot of verbiage around the pre-pandemic environment and some of the factors associated with this market segment prior to the pandemic. At the last paragraph of page 5, Colliers was talking about the office sector there in Q1 of 2018, and they state that the office sector is expected to see some changes as we move through 18. Tower 1 of True North Square continues to lease up during construction, is expected to compete in late 2018. The result of this additional office space will most likely be increased vacancy within downtown and downward pressure for rental rates for Class A buildings located at Portage and Main. Cap rates are expected to remain steady in the coming quarter. Moving briefly to the next page, to page 6, then these are pre-pandemic capitalization rates. It's the same rates and the same chart that we had presented to the board in connection with the previous assessment. There's a total of 5 transactions there, including 423 Main Street, which is just up the street from the subject property. That one traded in 2015, some years removed from the reference date, at a cap rate, as we calculated it, of 8.94%. So the cap rate conclusions that we came to on page 7 based upon all the data, again, pre-pandemic, and I'll specifically focus in on the Class D buildings. We'd suggested a cap rate in that case of 8.5%. So then moving on to certainly the difficult environment that the office market generally and Class Ds were certainly not exempted from those challenges during the pandemic. On page 8. Page 8, there's a Western Investor article that we quote to the bottom half of page 8. And it talks about the Prairie office sector facing challenges in 2021. It's from a December 2020 article. States that for Winnipeg, the office vacancy rate in Winnipeg is around 13%, just slightly higher than 19, but the outlook for this year is uncertain. The wild card is the addition of True North Square that added 350,000 square feet of prime downtown office space. Complex, which includes 17-story office and an apartment and a commercial office tower that opened in 19, has another 5th office tower that is being built for Wawanesa. Like all Western cities, Winnipeg saw negative lease up in 2020 with 26,000 square feet coming back to the market. As many tenants have opted for short-term leases or extensions of existing leases, Colliers Canada says it's hard to get a clear picture of the timeline for relocation or lease renewals going into 2021. So in that with that commentary in mind, we then on page 9, Altus Group had an opportunity to conduct a couple of surveys during the pandemic. One was in the spring, in April of 2020, and the second follow-up survey was done in November of 2020 when we were well into the pandemic. And this survey involved participants, extremely sophisticated participants in the real estate market across Canada, including obviously Winnipeg. A lot of these participants had significant holdings in Winnipeg. And we were asking them, as the persons who are fundamentally participating in the market and to a large extent are very much both impacted by and drivers of the market to the extent that they can. We asked them a number of questions about their experiences in 2020 in the pandemic. And the November 2020 survey, I'm now at the roughly the middle of page 9. The November 2020 survey indicated the following highlights, and it says, in the context of increased vacancy and anticipated hike in sublease space, sublease being a function of the work from home model and lower requirements of these office tenants, landlords will try to maintain face rates by adding more tenant incentives. In the second bullet, overall leasing activity in Q4 was very low in general, especially in the central business district at CBD, and not expected to pick up till workers return. And the 2 bullets down from that, I did want to point this out. It talks about lower quality assets, especially older Class B and C downtown buildings, will suffer the most from flight to quality and structural vacancy. And I'm sure we've all heard the flight to quality concept or phrase used before. And that's effectively a domino effect where, because the superior quality buildings are significantly impacted by a variety of factors, in this case, the substantial addition of Class A space, and combined with the substantial uncertainty and, quite bluntly, the anticipated reduction in the needs of their existing tenants for office space. So you had these things converging, and the flight to quality with this domino effect is, as these factors come to play in the higher quality buildings, specifically the A's and B's, then they offer more inducements. They offer a variety of incentives, including lower rents, to get tenants into their building to maintain vacancies at a reasonable level. Those tenants fundamentally are coming up from the lower quality buildings, enticed by a combination of incentives, lower rents, and anything else these landlords can do to bring these tenants in. It's not like there's going to be an influx of new tenants, especially not in the pandemic environment. So it's a matter of tenants moving around and trying to the inducements trying to be offered to the tenants to move into the higher quality space, which is the flight to quality that's being referred to there. The bottom of page 9, the respondents in the survey, fully 57% of the respondents expected office tenants to downsize their space in the future. That's again reflecting the actually pronounced success of the work from home model, where many companies discovered that the work from home model was working significantly better than anticipated it might. I'm going to then turn briefly to page 11. And these are, there's some various charts and information. This is all from the survey that was conducted of these investors and market participants. And they talked at the top, it says, what percentage change in market rents or face rates are you forecasting? As you can see, what we're talking about, obviously, with a Class D building is a lower quality office. And as you can see at the bottom chart, there was a significant percentage, roughly, I'm going to call it 27, 28%, that expected no change. But as you can see, there was a whole lot of respondents, close to 70%, that were expecting decreases of between 5 and 10% in the face rates or market rents that were going to be achieved. So that's a significant concern for these lower quality buildings. At the bottom of that page also indicates the majority of respondents were of the opinion that office cap rates would increase in 2021. And again, if we go briefly to the on page 12, the bottom chart, the lower quality office, the overwhelming response to the question as to what the trend in the cap rates was that they would be increasing. The majority actually suggested they would be increasing between 50 and 75 basis points, which is the dark shaded block in the November responses. But a very significant component also thought they might be going up 25 to 50 basis points, and some thought it might be as high as 75 to 100. There were a few that thought over 100. There were very few that thought that cap rates would be decreasing. But obviously, these investors who are fundamental participants in these markets were foreseeing cap rate increases because of the pandemic. So then if we turn very briefly to page 16, there's 3 transactions that we have listed there. 383 Dover Court, it's a suburban office. We've calculated a cap rate of 7.23%. 433 Main, there's an implied cap rate, and by that we mean the property was actually purchased, as you can see there on the right-hand side, bought for partial conversion to multi-res. 20% vacancy allowance was applied. And market rents of averaging $10 a foot were implied in our valuation. That implied cap rate then using those market rents and the vacancy allowance was 7.66%. It is interesting though, again, if you're familiar with this building, 4033 Main, it's just a couple of blocks north of the subject, and it reflects in very clear terms the struggles that these buildings were having in and of themselves just to be able to be viable as office buildings. And certainly would reinforce the notion that the subject, being a Class D office building, was operating indeed in a very difficult environment. And then you got 870 Portage with a 6.97% implied cap rate. So on page 17, we've got, again, our conclusions based on the evidence that we've submitted. And again, with the Class D category, we're suggesting a cap rate of 8.5%, notwithstanding that on the you need not turn there, but on the following page, and I've alluded to this, we do consider the designation as a historical resource to be a risk factor, but I've applied the 8.5% in this case as per our conclusions in our chart. So with all of that then, and Madam Chair, if I might ask that both the capitalization rate and the non-recoverable comments and questions to come be carried forward for the balance of the hearing, so we don't have to have me drone on for another hour and a half, that would be appreciated. With that then in mind, then our request based on the parameters I set forth previously, including the potential net rent of $334,595 and a cap rate of 8.5%, the request is to reduce the value to $2,507,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Questions?
Yes. I'll be brief. I just want to generally speak to your interpretation of fee simple or contract or leasehold. Can you turn to page 13?
Of my main brief, right?
Main brief, yes.
Yes. Yep.
So excluding the workspace, because that is different than office, obviously, we both account for that. bear with me here for a moment. I would be simply go to the marketplace, take that marketplace and evaluate the HP. You look at the leasehold in place and make a consolidation between the two. But you should be going with what marketplace is. So that's my interpretation. When I see you putting $8.50 in blue, that is your interpretation of rents. Obviously, it's 75 cents and a vacant space, right? So
The 850 indeed, that's what I've applied to
there's
that.
no market in there, and no 75 cent is obviously non-investment grade, it's just there.
Well, 75 cents being the best they could achieve though, but yes, I'm agreeing. I've applied a higher end than the 75 cents.
So what I'm looking at is, if all things being equal, why wouldn't you put 850 for the entire building, with the exception of the retail space in the main floor? Why would that only be selected to lower performing rents? If you're thinking if all things being equal, all seniors being roughly the same quality, why would you not say, okay, that's what the market is, and you put 850 or 850 throughout the building?
Certainly, the question's a good one, Mr. Paul. My average rent is $840 using the application.
We're just looking at.
No, but please let me finish. You've asked the question. The average rent is $840, including the Burke space, which isn't going to make a material difference. The Burke space at $1463. The average of the office market rents, like the office rents from units 300 up through 1500, there's some that are as high as you can see there. There's some that are as high as $10, or one's actually at 1017, and there's some that are as low as 75 cents. So when you're asking about why wouldn't I apply 850 to the entire space, it's because market rent is not a single number, Mr. Paul. Fundamentally, it is not a single number. And if I'm an investor, our job here, as has been stated by the municipal board, you have to look at market, absolutely, but you also have to look at the performance of the property. If all of these leases were from 2005 and 2010, absolutely, you've got to rely on market then, because there's no current indicators. When you've got indicators, that many indicators that close to the reference date, that is the market for the subject. That's not fees, or that's not leased fee, that's the market.
We're going to examine the actual subject performance. So you're indicating 850 overall, you come in at 840, but that's with highs and lows. I'm looking at a subject property that had a 75 cent rents, and you would never let anyone in your building for that, even if it's a short.
No, but Mr. Poole, why are you saying that? Because in fact, that's the best they could do under the June 2020 lease. Okay. That is the very best they could do.
Let's rephrase it a different way. I was going to exclude the 75 cent rent, but if you leave it in, I would exclude it. Your high and low is between $4.89 and $10.17. That's over a doubling of market, best indicator. Do you not pause on that and go, well, how come one rent's in the $4 rate and one rent's in the $10 rate? And how can I reconcile the difference if this is a sophisticated property owner behind it?
Absolutely not. And let me explain why. Mr. Pohl, we've agreed that this is a Class D building. You can appreciate, you've been at this for a while, you can appreciate that the landlord has two choices with these lower quality buildings. He can do the very best he can within his building to secure tenants at the highest rate of return he can, or he can carry vacant space, which is extremely costly. So if the landlord wants to demand, the $8.50 or the $10 single number and carry a 35 or 45% vacancy, that's just not prudent. He has to work within the market parameters that he is given. And so therefore, a single number, and your question, Mr. Pohl, is a very good one, because within the market, and this was my very point, within the market, you're going to have a lot of fluctuations. Within a building, you're going to have a lot of fluctuations because, again, Mr. Pohl, if you look at the very lease you were talking about, this is unit 1001 at 75 cents. That unit, don't forget my comments earlier, that unit had been vacant. So the landlord had a choice to mitigate his losses, at least for a 1-year term, which is what the lease was, or continue to carry the vacant space. So when you're talking about a fee simple valuation, fee simple isn't a number. Fee simple is based on, if fee simple was a single number, Mr. Pohl, you and I should run out and invest in every single office building we can because it's a lock. This is like guaranteed. There are no guarantees. They're absolutely, even within a building, within a market, it's fluid and it's a range. And so when you look at the range, and I appreciate the fact that you've submitted your rent comparables. I'm not trying to suggest to you that they're not part of the market. They are, but you've got far stronger indicators in that very same time period of what this building under professional property management can achieve. And yes, there are variations. If they all averaged, you know, if you had, and I think you mentioned this earlier, if you had, you know, you got the very low and the very high, and if there's circumstances where they should be excluded, okay. But if we're going to exclude, Mr. Pohl, the 75 cents, we better exclude the two that are at $10 because those are on the high side.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Highs and lows, how there is some variation with the market. What I see here is extreme variation, which indicates
No. I don't quite agree. Can we go to my page 13? Are you still on my page 13?
$10.17. You don't see that as an extreme.
No, but Mr. Pohl, can I finish? Can I finish? Okay, you've got 75 cents on the low side, and you've got $10 and 10.17 on the high side. But then within that, and this is the very fluid nature I'm talking about, Mr. Pohl, within that, you've got rents that are typically in the upper fours, so 489 up to one at 955, and the rest of them between 6 and 8 or 6 and 9. It's again, you absolutely need to look. If you've got an older lease that bears no, like obviously different market conditions, if it's a lease that was negotiated in whatever, I'm using an example, 2010 or whatever, yeah, then you need to understand very clearly, even if it's a long-term lease, does that fit within market parameters? But when you've got these indicators, that many indicators, that close to the reference date, that is the market. And it's, with respect, Mr. Pohl, I just don't agree it's a single number. It is not. It never is.
One step further, if you prior appropriate statistical analysis on it, perhaps an average, a weighted average, and a median, would you not get drastically different numbers? And typically you'd want those three numbers closer together to get a better result.
But Mr. Pohl, real estate doesn't operate with statistics in that manner.
Let's go to your Burke's rent. If you look on your page 25, which is the retail page, which is obviously different from the rest of it.
Yeah.
You have a rent that was net effective at around the $18 range, then dropped to about the $10.53.
Not net effective, it's net.
Sorry, net range, whatever the net $18, then down to $9.53. But that's only for 1 year. As of March 31st, 2021, the lease ends. Would you not know? And Altus has been very good with my hearing, not besides from you, but Altus has been very good with bringing it right at the reference date rates. Does that rent continue on at $9.50? Was there a renegotiation for a long-term rent?
Nope. It was a 2-year term, and I apologize. The reason I didn't submit this, Mr. Pohl, is because of 2021 rent roll. But I will tell you, it was an April 1st, 2021 renewal for a 2-year term, fully gross lease as it had been amended back in 2020. So a 2-year term with a net rent of $9.31. So it's 20 cents less.
So
and I did not submit that because it's, as I say, it's got post-reference information in it.
So when you have a drop of 100% in range rent from 19 or 18 to 9, do you not see that as a large factor? Like there must be something going on. You can't just say it's COVID. There must be a rationale to that. If you're
absolutely, it's a function of what that tenant was willing to pay in the exceptionally difficult circumstances of both COVID and the general environment. So absolutely, I think the implication, Mr. Pohl, is somehow there's got to be something non-market going on. That's absolutely wrong. I categorically say that was actually two arm's length parties who were Burke's needing to negotiate a reduction to stay viable, the landlord trying to achieve the best that they could, and that's the result. And that's the purest form of market one can get.
Let me rephrase it a different way. Is that a holdover lease, meaning that possibly there's a new tenant coming in or new development of that space? Was it just a short-term gap to fill the space for a while?
It was a 2-year renewal.
But there's no change of ownership as far as use of the space, or sometimes there's holdovers. Hey, I'm going to leave your building, and they go, hold on, wait for a little bit. let me get another tenant in, or let me reconfigure the space, can you hold on to this discounted rate that wouldn't necessarily be at market? Is that?
If it was an overhold situation, the landlords are going to charge more. They don't take less rent for an overhold situation. But if Berks, what I don't know, the component of your question that I don't know is if Berks was renewing for short term because they planned on moving out. I don't know that. But typically landlords, this landlord is going to get the best rent that he can. But if he already knows that Berks is leaving, he might become actually less flexible. But I do not, to be fair, I do not know the answer to your question if the Berks was saying we're going to leave, but we need the space for another 2 years.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to, could we move on from the rents?
Fair. Okay, all right, I hear you.
No, just because, you're agreeing to disagree and it's just going on and.
Moving on to your page 19.
Yes.
It's to the 588,000 maintenance and repair. When you look down for the capital cost summary, you have 437,000 for your elevator upgrade. That would imply that roughly there's over $1 million spent. But when you look at your page 23, we only see the 589.45. You don't see that 437.
And you wouldn't, Mr. Pohl. That's a capital. The capital items never hit the income statement. It's only the maintenance and repair items that hit the income statement. So they've reported it exactly correctly.
Okay, so I'm just making sure that that wasn't part of.
No, it's not. It's not part of the 488. If that's your question, or sorry, 588. It is not part of that. No.
That was my next question. Getting back to, I'm going to generalize this for your capitalization risk. Everything is probably associated with COVID. Would that not be future forecasting, meaning future events that happen to occur but are expected to occur, might be hypothetical, no different than a pro forma that you would expect to come in the future? That be post-reference information that you put in weight to, rather than the current events.
Mr. Pohl, I guess I'd fundamentally say when you have the most sophisticated real estate investors in Canada talking about what they've been seeing in 2020, which was tenants either with short-term renewals or asking for downsizes, or obviously in a lot of cases, they've got government assistance. And when you've got these folks, these are very, very sophisticated folks who understand the market because that's their business. And so are they basing their forecasting? You use the word forecasting, absolutely it is, but this isn't sort of pie in the sky, we're going to see what happens. This is very specific projections based on the events that were happening, including, in the case of the Winnipeg office, the addition of the space and everything else that we talked about. But the work it was well known by because these folks aren't just waiting for their tenants to tell them we're vacating. They're trying to understand what it is so that they can deal with it ahead of time. And when you got tenants with the hybrid work model being implemented successfully, the shutdowns and the reductions in spaces in the longer term, and you've got the landlord saying, we see vacancy coming, we see drop in net rents, and that fundamentally in the long term is impacting risk, which is why the conclusion is the risk, the relative risk to these properties, these office properties, is going to be increasing because of everything we're seeing. Is there hard data in November 2020? Can they point to specific transactions? I'm not aware of any, like where you could actually derive a specific cap rate. But is it conjecture and post reference? Absolutely not. It's based on their very, very knowledgeable look at what's happening in their respective markets and what they thought was coming from the most sophisticated people in the country who are dealing with these portfolios.
Would you not agree that the most sophisticated people in the country also work on a discounted cash flow go-forward basis?
Yep, they do. Without question, they do. Yeah.
So why would projection of future events that would affect that suddenly be put in way to here?
Because Mr. Pohl, if I think prior to the pandemic, I was going to get $150,000 in NOI with an average stabilized vacancy of 8%. And now I'm facing a vacancy that's almost doubled to 13% and rents that are either shrinking or expected to shrink. You can't have the same level of risk. The NOI is not sustainable. So either you've got to factor in your reduced NOI or you've got to elevate the risk for that NOI. And that's why I'm saying if you recall, in my evaluation, I'm applying an NOI of, I'm going to use round figures, 230 grand, which is far exceeding anything happening. If anything, the pandemic and the economic conditions in which this building was operated as of that date, if anything, that's very optimistic, and the rate would be higher still. But I'm sticking with 8.5. But your question is fair, because it is fundamentally it's forecasting. It's forecasting based on knowledge of what was going on and what the participants thought would be a longer term effect of some of these conditions.
That's all the questions I have, but I'll have a brief summary to generally what we've done.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions for Mr. Reimer?
Just the same question, Mr. Reimer, as I gave Mr. Pohl. Do you have pictures from the inside, and have you been at the building?
I've not been at the building other than as a sort of going to an office for a different purpose, but not for the purpose of a comprehensive inspection. And no, I don't have inside photos. Sorry.
And the 1950 age, would that suggest that not a whole lot of upgrades have been done to the interior? Like no major changes or anything to bring it up to, you know?
Well, upgrades, no, but I mean, this thing, the owners are, these folks are professional. They will be maintaining it as best they could. And Mr. Poe was correct in pointing out, for instance, the elevator expense, no, it wasn't expense, but the capital work done on the,
yeah.
So they're trying very, very hard to maintain an asset that retains at least some attraction for these tenants.
Right.
So they're not
I
going to
guess
let
that's hard to do with the historical thing.
that,
too, right?
well, I mean, that affects some, especially the exterior and some
Correct,
elements of the interior. But certainly what they're not going to do is they're not going to let the asset waste, because then they're in real trouble.
Right.
So that's, I do believe the 1950 is a fair reflection that the department's put on it for that purpose.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Marks.
Yes, the elevator's been upgraded at a large cost. There had to have been permits taken out on that one. And then the other cost was almost $600,000. I mean, there's got to have been upgrades to that structure to bring it up to today's codes within the different office spaces throughout that structure.
$600,000 though on a building, Madam Chair, on a building of this age, and as I said before, that's not a stabilized amount I would use. But the prior year was just a tick over 200, I think around 220, and that's a figure that is sort of year in and year out. So to answer Mr. Mark's question, is yes, 600,000 would indicate that for that particular year they did more work than typical, but the 200,000 is certainly an repairs and maintenance expense that is prevalent throughout the years prior to that, and including also 2019.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, just one quick question. I think you've stated a few times throughout your presentation that this building has a historical designation.
Yes, it does.
And normally, when I have agents coming to the board, they have some sort of documentation in their brief.
Could I refer you to page 9, please? So at the bottom of page 9, the third entry, there's a little chart there. And the third entry is the 191 Lombard with the that talks about the grade 2 designation. Now, the question is, did I put that report in? And I apologize to you, I didn't put the report in. So yeah, that is not in our, other than this chart, that is not in our submission, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you. Submission. I can't even speak anymore.
It's okay. Generally speaking, we'll speak to the non-recoverables first. We have 25 years plus of case law that says do not include tenant inducements, do not include asset management fees, do not include tenant improvement analysis, free rent, leasing commissions, things of these natures. I've seen as many as you want to go through, I can go through, as far as case law. I provided in the past multiple case laws. The board doesn't really want to hear it, but that's generally what it is. I have yet to see one case law which has said the opposite, please include. So when I see, a methodology from the agents, from all this and all their agents, including that, what explicitly has been said no to, I see that as not adhering to the case law that's at hand, not showing the proper respect to it. It's one thing to make a different case saying this is what has been in the past, but we're not making a different case in curating or no, I get that. But I think the best place for that to be contested is at the municipal board level, as they're the board that sets that case law. So far, from what I've seen from the panel, generally, last cycle, this cycle, that has been adopted multiple times by this panel, collective panel. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think you should be including that in any way, shape, or form included of that. Another good point is the agent spoke to outside of the Saskatchewan's assessment where they do include leasing commissions. We don't include that here. If the role is reversed and the board said yes to leasing commissions, we went outside and grabbed a case law outside the jurisdiction that another province had said don't use it and then brought it back. I think you'd have a very hard argument from the opposing party to say please stop doing that. Respect the case law that's in place. So that does affect between the 3% and the 7%. I think the 3% should be maintained. As far as rent in place in the class buildings, an average between $11.14 from what I reviewed of the marketplace, with a bit of caution to the higher end of it. I reviewed the Johnson report, that's right in the range that we're seeing. When you look at our comparisons and our comparables, we see a tight range with both those level rents between 14 and 11. What you see in the subject property is a range that is from 75 cents to $10.17, and the majority of it, if you take out the extreme outlier, the 75 cent is at a $4 range to a $10 range. That is a significant difference in value. I don't think that's appropriate, and that's cause for me to pause on that, because why should once a year you get a difference of that degree? It's not like you're averaging 10 and you're getting 11 or 9 or 850. You see that difference of degree, I think that's cause for pause on that. And I don't think that a lot of weight should be put into giving those level of rents in place, because then that would reduce the overall average. So from that point, I think our perspective of our marketplace at around $11 to $14 with arguably this being a little bit underperforming at $9.64 is reasonable. And that range should be carried forward in your analysis. That is inclusive of the including the workspace in that range as well. So it's even less than if you include the higher end rate for the retail space. So with that, our standard parameters are what they are at 15% for vacancy, the subject's at 13, and are arguably 3 to 7% for not approvals. I think you should adopt 3% as well proven out. And from that point, I'll let you make a decision on your coverage. Thank you.
Mr. Reimer.
Well, just because Mr. Pohl summarized, then I feel the need to do the same. So I'm going to be quick though. So on the, I completely agree with Mr. Pohl. We need to get the non-recoverable expense item back to the municipal board using the framework though. And I put this caveat on it, using the framework that we are suggesting, because what I will say, I'm very, very familiar with the decisions Mr. Pohl's talking about. But as I mentioned previously, fundamentally, these decisions are based on agents at that time. Some of them, decisions go back 25 years or more. It's agents saying, I've got $100,000 in net rent, but I want to take off another $25,000 in tenant inducements, free rent, leasing commissions, take it off the top line dollars to get to this net effective rent. And I've talked about the net effective rent tonight. We're not doing that. What the board, what the municipal board ultimately will need to decide is, and we're going to be very forthright in our approach. Board, you've said you can't calculate a net effective rent. Totally agree, because if you start using NER net effective rent, I'm going to shorten it to NER. You start using NER calculations, that's going to impact your capitalization rate calculation. Absolutely, it all ties together. Here's the distinction. We're not calculating an NER. We're not taking, dollar for dollar off the top line potential net rent. What we're doing is applying a stabilized expense allowance that's consistent with the data. Mr. Poe mentioned the Saskatchewan materials. We're not relying on Saskatchewan cases. What we're saying is other jurisdictions, including formerly this department, had recognized the non-recoverable expense as a legitimate item, and rightly so. That's the reason for putting in the SAMA, the reference to the SAMA, not because we're relying on their case law, it's because it's a legitimate expense item in both appraisal and assessment theory. So taking it a step further, though, recall my comments on the non-recoverable if one's inclined. And this board is obviously has absolute authority to decide at 5%, 1%, or something else. But for the same reasons that the municipal board has said you can't use an NER because that impacts your cap rate, that's exactly what I'm saying to you this evening. If one adjusts the 5% down to 1%, which you're entitled to do, that fundamentally then necessitates an increase in our capitalization rate by 25 basis points for that very reason. Our capitalization rate calculations are based on the inclusion of the full 5%. If you take it out, then the indicated cap rate goes up by 33 points. We're asking for an increase in that scenario of 25 points. That's precisely the logic the municipal board was saying. You can't deduct it from one and then use a different methodology for your cap rate. We're not. We're using the same methodology. As to the rent issue, with greatest respect to Mr. Pohl, you can't take many market indicators as close to, or in many cases closer than the market indicators that was provided by the department within the subject building and just ignore them because A, they're gross leases, and B, because the numbers don't seem to jive with the rest of the parameters. Madam Chair, recall that there's a total of 11 indicators in 2019 and 2020. It is not difficult. The calculations, in fact, were provided by Ash Management, the landlord, to very quickly and easily calculate the precise net rent. And of course, there's fluctuations. That's why real estate has risk. Real estate is not a single number. It's fluid and it's always evolving and always changing. And when you've got this many indicators this close to the reference date, there are some that are going to be higher and there's going to some that'll be lower. And if, of course, the landlord's making the decision to accept some of the lower ones, because the option is to carry vacant space at which is a very costly endeavor. So they're getting what they as best they can in a lot of these cases. The leases, typically the net rents are between, call it $4.50 and $9. There was the one that was lower, a couple that are higher. But that is a function of what the market is willing to bear for this space very near the reference date. And if anything, the conditions were actually deteriorating between 2020 and the reference date. Thank you all for listening. Mr. Pohl, thank you for taking your time to go through this so thoroughly. And those would be my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. I realize the time is late and we only have 2 items left, but I think we should just take a very quick 5-minute break.
Thank you.
And I'd like to call this hearing back to order. We are going to move on to item number 5, which is 35 King Street.
Madam Chair, for the board's reference, I'm simply seeking a confirmation under 54.1.
That's terrific. Thank you. Mr. Pohl, would you read 35 King Street into you?
35 King Street, specific address, file number is 2249. Roll number is 1306002900. The assessment is for $3,008,000. There is a bit of discrepancy on income approach. The summary of 2 is for $3,164,000. I'm not asking for an increase. That's just a numerical rounding difference. There may have been a change in CRU size or an updation, but it's so close that we're not going to change our opinion. So we're asking for that to be confirmed, and the ratio between the class 60 and 40 is $1,509,000 for the 60T and $1,499,000 for the 40S.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer?
No questions. Just seeking confirmation. Thank you.
Most of the 40, sorry.
It's on. It just,
Oh, sorry.
right here at the bottom is what you should be using. That's, well, I mean, you can use either one if you want, but all of it happens on your page 10. The summation is a little different. It's a little bit of, I can't explain this. But what's on file on roll number is that what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
Just confirming you're going with the 3,008,000, not the 3,164,000 and leaving it at 1.509 and 1.499.
Yeah, and that's what it says.
Yeah.
in the-
Yeah, okay, got it.
Mr. Marks?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions either. And we can move on to 123 Valentine.
File number is 221157. Roll number is 1306282700. 123 Valentine is the address. The assessment for the 2023 cycle is 281,000, and similar to what I just spoke to, there's a bit of a rounding. I can't explain why the market we have on file produced a $2,340,000 assessment, other than there was maybe a change of CRU size internally, and that would trigger just a bit of a shift in the value. I don't, and I'm not asking for that. That's like about not even a 4% increase. So we'll just leave it at that. What went on the roll, and we'll move forward from there. So, building was built in 1900. We have an effective age of 1945. It's Class D. We have no on-site parking, and we have a leasehold area of 19,000 for $550. So we have a sale in 2010 at $2,730,000. I did not research this sale exclusively. I believe I looked at it in the past, but for this assessment cycle, so far we've really put in any way to it. Other than to speak to that, it has been a rising commercial marketplace in the last decade. So you would expect that all things being to be increased. So given to page 4 and 5, which are the same from 4 and 5 are the same B comparables that we've already used. Again, the 2018 to 2020, we have $14.31, $14.35, and $13.88 for average, weighted average, and median. And one of the comparables is number 11, which is in at $14. As we look at the next page, which is page 5, again, we have $11.61, $11.44, and median of $11 for average, weighted average, and median. So again, not between 2015 and 2017. So when we look at and is the reporting of the property, they have reported everything that we've asked for. They've indicated that there is a 21% vacancy, so a bit higher than what our market price analysis is. They've also indicated that it's partially owner occupied and that there's a net rents are in place. So. And when we look to the actual rent roll, which is on page 13, we see that the basement and the second unit is owner occupied, and although they're showing both rents, obviously we would be those, and then the other tenancies for Hippo Camus occupy two CRUs, and they are in that. So, we go through the workup, which is on page 6, pretty straightforward workup. We have an overall lease rate of $12.53 applied to the 19,532 square feet, which produces a BGI of $244,819. Our standard parameters apply at 15% for vacancy, 3% for expenses, not recoverable expenses, I should say, $8 for shortfall, which gives us a net operating income of $178,415, and that's capped at 7.6%. Gives us our $2,340,000, and again, we're going with what was already put on the roll, which is a little bit less than that, at $2,280,000. So not as increase there, but that's what the marketplace indicated. And I think that's reasonable. It should be accepted here today.
All right, thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions?
Apologize, I'm not stalling. I'm just doing a quick bit of, I think I understand, Mr. Pohl, what happened here with respect to the slight change.
Fill me in.
Yeah, no, I'll talk about that in just a moment when I present my brief. But Madam Chair, can I make it as simple as this? Could we please have the previous comments, questions as to non-recoverables and cap rate carried forward, because that will be the focus of the discussion on this one, and then I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
So no questions?
No other questions. So because as I'll explain shortly, that the real, I guess I should ask the one question, Mr. Pohl, again, the 3% expense allowance, I should say, and the 7.6% cap, those are both model driven, correct?
Yes, they are.
Okay,
Yes.
and Madam Chair, recall my previous questions as to the office market segments and the cap rate information, and ask that to be carried forward, and that would be my only question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Knight? Ms.
I
Knight?
have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
And none for me, thank you.
Did you expect this property?
I have been in it over the years, but not for the purpose of this appeal. It was considerable that ago.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Mr. Reimer?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Can I briefly ask the board, while Mr. Pohl's brief at page 6 is open, this is where I think that the difference had come in, and our page 19. So the difference, I believe, in the slight difference with the workup, on page 19 is the assessor's original workup. It had an area of 18,961 relative to the slightly higher area that Mr. Pohl's got now of 19,532. So I think that's where the difference lies, but it's not material, and here's why I say that. If we could turn then to my submission on page 16, please. So on page 16, I'm not sure where, and Mr. Pohl, I'll leave this question with you. I'm not sure where the department got 19,532. We've applied, as you can see on our page 16, 19,222. So it's higher than the area shown on the department's original valuation, but lower than yours. Our information at 19,222 though comes from the information submitted by the owner, which is both of us have put in evidence. So it's going to distill to this, Madam Chair. As shown on page 16, the 19,222 square feet, we've applied an average rate, including the basement space at 1240, which results in a value of 238,436. So there is a little bit of a difference, but not a huge difference between that and actually the valuation shown on Mr. Pohl's brief on page 6. There's a difference of about $6,000. So it isn't material, but where the differences continue to add up to some degree is the non-recoverables at 5%, but the single biggest factor here is the cap rate. So the department's applied 7.6% for the same reasons we've talked about previously for this OD building. We're suggesting the 8.5% cap rate in this case. My suggestion to the board is going to be this, if you might indulge me for a moment. Because of the very slight variations, and I'm not conceding in any way the 5% non-recoverable debate that we've been having, I'm not conceding that issue, but my suggestion is going to be this: if we take the department's NOI as shown on Mr. Pohl's brief of 178,415, we are again quite close that way. So my methodology would be different, but using the correct area of 19,222, I would probably come in at something fairly close to that, a little bit lower because of the 5% non-recoverable. But my suggestion is going to be if we take the 178,415 and capitalize that at 8.5%, the indicated value would then change to 2,099,000. And so please, if you might record my request to reduce the assessment from the 2,281,000 to 2,099,000. That would be based upon the application of that higher NOI, slightly higher NOI with a capitalization rate of 8.5%. Thank you.
Mr. Reimer, can you just repeat that last number, please?
Yeah, 2,099,000, 2,099,000.
Mr. Cole, question?
So all things being equal, we already spoke to the cap, we already spoke to the non-recoverables. Thanks for pointing out the areas. And that's typically what would happen when you come in and you have a business assessment change because of new tenant or whatever. This area may change a little bit. It's a go-forward basis, but I just have a bit of a question. I calculated quickly. It is 19,222,000 based on the rent roll, but then on the first page they report 20,702. So.
Sorry, Mr. Poole, which? For me, which?
My page 11. I don't know if you have it in your brief, but I
do. It's at my page 20. Yeah. The 20,702. That's reported as the total leasable area. I guess I'd suggest that's the number that's in error, and I've used. And while we're here, I should calculate.
You're using 2022 ending in 2020. You're using the post reference signing. Not that it really matters.
I'm just going to calculate, make sure that the square footage we've got from the rent roll is exactly what I'm suggesting. Yeah, so Madam Chair, could I ask the board members and Mr. Poole briefly to turn to our page 22? I don't believe this is post-reference, Mr. Poole. This is where I got my number from. So that on page 22 is the tenant information form that was submitted.
Yeah, it says May 5th, 2022. You have the 21 and the 22 in it.
Oh, I do too. I apologize, Mr. Poole. That was an error. That's not something I meant to do.
Yeah.
What I will say as far as physical space, it adds up. So, Madam Chair, please disregard that. Yeah, could I ask the board members, Mr. Poole, go to our page 28. Let's try that number. And again, I'll add these up again to make very sure that the numbers on there are consistent with what I'm saying.
Yeah, I added it up to just to confirm it was the 19,222.
Okay. So that is where I got it from, Mr. Poole. And I apologize for that post reference, INE.
But is it possible, like I'm just looking at it? No, they don't. No, they report that. So
I treat the rent roll information as the most precise by far, Mr. Poole. That'll be based on.
I don't disagree. I've seen errors in this in the past too. So, but I just on such a small property, you wouldn't get it wrong. Okay, I'll let you because just that's the only question.
Thank you. Ms. Knight, did you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
And Mr. Rice. And I also have no questions. Do either of you have a wish for summation on this?
Well, thank you.
All right. All the items have been heard on this docket this evening, and this hearing is closed. And I thank you, Mr. Reimer and Mr. Poole, for your time this evening.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, you as well.
So 5 more minutes after I'm leaving then.